that she's haunted. Not her house, not a mysterious urn that she keeps or something. Her. I've heard stories from her boyfriend about times that she stood outside ringing her doorbell and knocking for an hour, because she's trained herself to just ignore it. I was hanging out with her on her bed, and thought I honestly can't remember what we're doing. It wasn't anything naughty. Her back was to me and she was laying on her side, and I was on my back staring up at the ceiling. I was closest to her bedroom door, which was closed, and it was just the two of us in her entire house. Suddenly, movement in my peripheral vision caught my eye, and I see a shadow silently creep along outside the door, blocking out the hallway light coming from the bottom. I very slowly turned my head to look at Rebecca, and she hadn't moved. Her back was still to me, so that she couldn't see what I was looking at. I looked back at the shadow and sort of tilt my head back and forth, thinking it's a reflection of some weird angle that's playing games on my eyes. Nope. This shadow is actually creeping along outside the door. When it gets a little more than halfway, Rebecca out of nowhere suddenly screams, "Becky, go away!" Back then, I never believed him. A few years later, we're all grown up, and Patrick's mum accidentally caught fire in the kitchen. Patrick's elder brother tried to save her and got his hands burnt in the process. No one knows how it happened. And after being in the hospital for 2 to 3 days, she succumbed to her injuries. And at the time, we didn't have those childhood stories in our recollection. And then later that year, we're all friends, and we're just having a late night walk and talking about ghost stories, just joking around trying to scare each other. And Patrick was all quiet and listening. All of a sudden, he says, "Do you remember I told you I used to see fires in my house? See how my mum died?" That was creepy. In the same neighborhood, there is another friend of mine, Tom. Tom's dad was an alcoholic, and you can imagine all the bad things that alcoholism comes with to exist in Tom's life. They were extremely poor. Side note, he's doing great now because he's super dedicated and very humble. But anyway, back then, his dad got diagnosed with tuberculosis. He was hospitalized and things were bad. Now in the apartment below Tom's apartment, there lived a family who had this mentally challenged man who was in his late 40s or early 50s. He wasn't married and rarely left the house. One morning at around 5 a.m., while Tom's father was hospitalized, this old man knocked on Tom's door. Tom opened it groggily, and the man said, "Why aren't you ready yet? Go get ready and visit your dad for the last time." That was the day Tom's father died in the hospital, and he later told me about the incident. Both these stories are so convincing, because I know these guys, and I really don't think they would lie about something as devastating as losing a parent. October 20th, 6 years ago. I came home from class at around 11:30, and no one else was home. I hung out at home for a bit, and at 2:30, I was overcome with sleepiness. Being the bum that I am, I lay down in my bed and set a timer on my phone for a 20-minute nap. I fell asleep quickly, and after around 5 minutes I was awoken in my bedroom to the door opening and had a split second of a panic before my dog jumped up on my bed and laid down next to me. Then I fell back asleep. After another 5 minutes of sleep, I instantly jolted awake because I was certain that there was someone standing next to my bed behind me. I assumed it was my mother, who would be likely pissed that I was sleeping in the middle of the day. I awoke and turned around in one movement, and there was no one. I checked my phone and had another 8 minutes of sleep. I went back to sleep only to be woken up by my phone ringing. It was my mother. She said that my great-aunt, who had been in the hospital after a stroke-like event for a week, had died at 1 o'clock. My mum then said that she knew my aunt was going to die today because she had seen a wraith, a sort of ghost, a warning that someone was going to die that very morning. My mum is Scottish and very superstitious, but I don't believe any of that. She said that when she woke up in the morning to take my brother to school, she went into my room to see if I was still asleep, and she saw a wraith standing next to my bed. It was at that point my brain crapped itself. I have a friend called Rebecca. Mutual friends of ours have always told me that she's haunted. Not her house, not a mysterious urn that she keeps or something. Her. I've heard stories from her boyfriend about times that she stood outside ringing her doorbell and knocking for an hour because she's trained herself to just ignore it. I was hanging out with her on her bed and thought I honestly can't remember what we're doing. It wasn't anything naughty. Her back was to me and she was laying on her side, and I was on my back staring up at the ceiling. I was closest to her bedroom door, which was closed, and it was just the two of us in her entire house. Suddenly, movement in my peripheral vision caught my eye, and I see a shadow silently creep along outside the door, blocking out the hallway light coming from the bottom. I very slowly turned my head to look at Rebecca, and she hadn't moved. Her back was still to me, so that she couldn't see what I was looking at. I looked back at the shadow and sort of tilted my head back and forth, thinking it's a reflection of some weird angle that's playing games on my eyes. Nope. This shadow is actually creeping along outside the door. When it gets a little more than halfway, Rebecca out of nowhere suddenly screams, "Becky, go away!" I almost snapped my neck to look at Rebecca because she scared the absolute hell out of me, since I thought she might have been napping. And she still had her back to me. I looked back towards the door and the shadow was already gone. I asked her what the hell was going on and she simply said, Just don't worry about it." And she drifted back into her nap. The next occurrence happened in the same apartment. I was sitting on the toilet when I heard my main door open. I creaked open the bathroom door because I didn't realize anyone was coming home at this time, and I just wanted to know who it was. My two cats were sitting right outside the bathroom and were staring at me. No response from whoever was opening the door. I thought I may have just been hearing things, but suddenly, a loud, drawn-out gasp comes from the main door area, which is in the living room. Both of my cats immediately look towards the living room and drop into runaway mode. I slammed the door closed, locked the door, finished my poop, and then just sat there for a good hour or so. I actually don't remember what happened after, as this was a while ago, but I do specifically remember that none of my family came home during that day when I asked them later on. I was in bed, and for whatever reason, I started shaking ever so slightly, a vibration so subtle that I actually got up, held my breath, and thought that maybe breathing was causing it or something. I lay back down, and the shaking starts again. I pull the covers off myself and open the light, thinking that maybe one of my cats was locked in my room and was rubbing against the bed or something. Nope, it wasn't there either. I get back into bed and pull up my blanket. The shaking didn't start again, but I literally felt something crawl towards me on top of the blanket. I cannot stress how much I am not lying about this. If anyone has a cat or any other animal, and have had them step on you while you are under your blanket, that's pretty much how it felt. Except the stepping on area felt larger, almost like the size of a closed fist. It approached me slowly, seemingly avoiding pressing down directly on my legs. I didn't see what was going on or what happened after, because the next thing I know, I've just woken up and it's morning. I remember what happened the night before quite vividly, and though I was really uncomfortable, I wasn't exactly scared. I go outside to the bathroom and close my door behind me. The second my hand leaves my doorknob, I hear it shaking incredibly fast, and then it just stops, like something was rattling it extremely hard. And then that was that. There's literally nothing else that happened. Years later though, while working in a theme restaurant, I met an actress who worked as one of the restaurant characters. The first time we ever met, she told me that she felt a really strange energy about me.
like there's something following me around. I told her about my hauntings, which I actually do have a few more of, and she told me she was a Wiccan, which I had no idea was a thing at the time. The one thing she did say was that it didn't feel like a threatening energy, and that maybe it was a guardian angel of some kind, which is why I don't feel complete dread or fear when these things occur. To sum it up, I'm fairly certain that Becca must have somehow latched onto me instead, or I picked up something from Rebecca's place. I haven't spoken to her for close to 15 years, but now that I'm writing this all out, I think I'm going to reach out to her and see if
Hello,
she remembers
I'm here. We're
anything
gonna listen to these scary
about
stories.
that day.
The other night, I was driving into the center lane of a 3-lane city street when all of a sudden a car comes into my right blind spot and almost slams into me. I look over and see it swerving in and out of the lane, braking abruptly. I honk and I look over to see if the driver is possibly distracted, and I see that the man driving is drinking something out of his brown bottle. The man then comes up to my side and is screaming at the top of his lungs. Not wanting to get involved, I then make a lane change to the leftmost lane to get away from the man. I can still hear him screaming, so I turn on my rearview camera and see the man swerving across 2 lanes from the rightmost lane to get behind me. He then starts speeding up as if he's trying to ram into me from behind. Once I see him inches away from my bumper, I decide to run the red light I am stopped at and make a right turn in front of the 2 lanes of traffic beside me, in the hopes that at this point he'll just leave me alone. I look in my rear view camera and once again I see the man is following me, trying to hit me from behind yet again. I panic and speed off on a side street, but I look back and he won't let up. He's swerving in the lanes behind me and is trying to keep up. In the distance, I see a freeway on-ramp, so I speed over in the hopes of losing him on the freeway. The on-ramp has 2 lanes that merge into one. I pass up a car prior to the merge, thinking that the car will create a buffer between me and the man chasing me. When I look back into my camera, I see that the man is driving in the shoulder, on the brush, to the side of the on-ramp in order to pass the other car and catch me up. At this point, I'm driving close to 100 miles an hour and scared for my life. So I slow down and dial 911. I explain the situation to dispatch, and she recommends I try to get away to safety. The man then catches me up and begins coming up to my side of the freeway, and he repeatedly tries to swerve into me as if to ram me or run me off the road. I slow down in the hopes that he'll pass me up, but he too slows down, and his wife in the passenger seat throws a bottle at my car. For a second I lose visibility, as the car is covered in a brown foamy liquid. I think to myself, surely this is the extent of his road rage, and I look over, and it seems as if he's continuing on the freeway, ready to get away. I then pull off the next freeway exit, thinking I can just leave the situation, and as I do, the man sees me and makes a 4-lane change onto the exit ramp and tries to ram me once again at the freeway exit. I am then forced to speed through the city streets, and I finally end up at a red light, trapped next to the man. I look over at the man and roll down my window, and he's screaming at me. "Why did you honk at me? You're trying to make me look like a bad father in front of my kids? You want to go?" His wife is also yelling at me, asking why would I honk at him in front of his kids. I look into the back seat and see 2 children in car seats. Since I'm on speaker with the dispatcher, she hears all of this and tells me I should just try and get away. At this point I'm done. I just want to get away from him, so I make a U-turn to head back onto the freeway. He follows me and almost hits me in a plastic construction lane barrier to do so. He then follows me again and is trying to hit me from behind once I get onto the overpass to get on the freeway. I glance at him, to the side of me, and see that he's holding something up in my direction. Suddenly, I hear a very loud bang, and the dispatcher on the phone screams, "Did he shoot you? Are you okay?" Thinking I've been shot, I start screaming. "He's shooting at me! He's shooting at me! He's gonna kill me!" Realizing that running away isn't working, I stop at the man's speed off. Luckily, there's no broken glass and I'm not
You know
injured
what you
in
do
any
that
way.
situation? Just fucking
The dispatcher tells me
blow
to pull off to a nearby
straight
safe
into 'em,
location,
fucking
so I go to the
shoot at
parking
me,
lot of a
motherfucker.
nearby mall, and I tell the
Whole thing's a
dispatcher the
weapon.
make, colour and model of the car as well as the partial license plate. The whole time I drive there, I'm very concerned the man could be following me again, but they send an officer immediately over to file a police report. In waiting for the officer, I realise that my car's cameras are always recording, so I hit the save button and the officer comes over and I tell him the story describing everything in detail. I also tell him that I may have some footage of the whole thing. We take a walk around my car, and for the
What's your
most part
deal?
there's no
Keep looking
damage.
at me all
The
funny.
officer then informs me that because I'm not injured and because there is no damage to the car, there really isn't anything that can be done. I ask him if it wasn't an assault, and he says because the bottle hit my car and not me, it's not assault. I ask him if it's reckless driving, and he says here in California that's a misdemeanor, and that requires the presence of a CHP officer to convict. I then ask him if it could be considered an attempt at murder, because he was trying to ram into me, but he says that this is just plain old road rage, and there's not much that can be done. At most, the officer says that once he has the complete license plate, an officer can go out and talk to him. I ask him if the potential footage could help in getting this man reprimanded in some way, and he tells me to only send me the highlights and necessary screenshots, though he doesn't think anything at all can be done. At the end of all of this, I'm extremely shaken up. I eventually go home and review the footage captured by my car. Luckily, I have the entire thing recorded. The moment he almost hit me, his wife throwing a bottle at me, and his face as he's yelling at me, his license plate, and even him trying to ram me. It's all recorded. A few days later, the officer calls me and confirms the license plate. I have a video with a recording he has from the freeway / on and off ramp. A week and a half have passed, and there have been no updates. While I understand the law is the law,
That's why he's
it is unacceptable to me that this man could be so overtly aggressive on the road, threatening my life and the lives of his children, and the lives of everyone else on the road, with no punishment. I was genuinely scared for my life, and in the process, both he and I endangered others on the road. Ultimately, this has left me feeling very disappointed with the system. An act of violence was committed, and due to technicalities, the driver gets off. I'm trying to keep my retelling as factual as possible, but this was a really terrifying experience. Even in the past few days, I still feel a bit hesitant to be an aggressive driver, like overtaking people or just changing lanes, and have lost my comfort at home. I really wish I could say this didn't get to me, but it has. One odd detail is that the man was taking pictures of my car before the bang happened. What could he possibly want with it? Has anyone been in a situation like this? Is there truly nothing that can be done? Any recommendations how I can at least have someone check on those kids? Like I said, I have footage and everything.
rather do a gender get me off the fucking
I have had several creepy experiences. I'm going to start from the one when I was in college, in my bedroom. The building was modern, and so I was more caught off guard. I guess you expect ghosts to be chilling in some old stone building and whatnot. I lived in Lincoln, UK, which is a fairly historical city. I was laying in bed at night, grinding shinies on Pokemon Diamond, when out of the corner of my eye I saw movement. I looked up from my white DS, and at the end of my bed was a figure, a woman in all black, just staring. I stared back, silently, my brain frozen over. Without looking away, I felt for the light switch and hit the light. For some reason I assumed that this would make it go away, but it didn't. I shouted, jumped out of bed and ran. My housemates were all awake in the living room, and they were super concerned. We went back to my room and there was nothing there. I got mocked for the rest of the year. Roll on 4 years, I'm living on my own in China, Nanchang. In the winter, it gets cold and lonely. Being the social butterfly that I am, I decided to buy a bird from the old pet market. The guy gave me a fairly good deal on a majestic baggy. I don't know what her English name is. He assured me that I would be able to teach the bird to talk. Lurk. It didn't take long for the bird to become used to me, and eventually would happily sit on my head,
hand or shoulder, but would never talk. I named it Boromir after the most important character in Lord of the Rings. As winter went on, things started to get a bit strange. One night I was sitting watching Arrested Development when all of a sudden the bird began to laugh. Not that weird, right? Everyone laughs at Arrested Development, but this laugh was creepy, and it was high, and then got low. A moment later there was a banging on my door. I opened it and a man started shouting at me. I had no idea what he was saying, and then he barged into my flat. He walked over the balcony, one I had never even bothered to open, and started shouting stuff at me. I walked over, and even though it was locked up, it was flooded. An outside tap was fully turned on, and the water was pouring all down the side of the building. He had to go and get a key. Turns out he was maintenance, opened the balcony and turned the tap off. It took a while as the tap had been twisted so tight it was stuck. In the background, Boromir just laughed. The second time I heard this laugh, I wasn't alone. Another foreign teacher from Holland was sitting with me. We were both drinking whiskey and listening to music, when suddenly the laugh began again. We watched as the knob of the stereo turned on its own, first all the way up, then all the way down. At the time, I didn't make a connection with the laughing and the weirdness. We were both pretty unnerved. One night, I brought a girl back with me. She was scared of birds, so I put Boromir in his cage and covered it with a thick blanket. We went to bed. I closed the bedroom door and she got a headache, and we went to sleep. I could hear the bird laughing through the cage and through the wooden door. We woke up to banging on the door. This time it was the bedroom door. Someone was in my apartment. The girl started to panic, in ways that only girls do when there's an intruder, so I grabbed something heavy and went over to the door and pulled it open. At first I thought there was no one there, but then I looked down. Boromir was at my feet staring silently. The girl didn't come back. At this point I decided the bird had to go. I put it back in the cage and found a friend who'd said he'd take it. The final night before he left, I was in bed, and I heard the laugh again. It filled me with dread, and waited for something to happen, but nothing did. I fell asleep, and woke up in my bedroom to the door slamming. And I woke up. There was someone in my room. She was speaking to me in a very hurried fashion, but there was no sound. She wasn't like the scary Lincoln lady. She was scared. She ran out of my room and I followed, hitting as many light switches as possible, and then she was gone. The birdcage was empty, but I could hear the laughter coming from my bedroom. I went back in, and sitting on the top of the lamp was Boromir. I didn't sleep that night. The next day I took him to my friend's place. I had told him everything honestly, as I'm not that much of an idiot, but he was still eager to have the bird. And this is the part of the story that seems the most far-fetched, but I swear down it happened. I gave the bird to my friend, and as I was about to leave, a little voice in my head said, "I miss you." In the end, the bird escaped from my friend's house a few months after that, and was never heard from again. Probably for the best.
My dad died this past December. We were close, and I am still devastated. Dad was an Air Force officer, avid bird watcher, practical joker, and an amazing cook. He also put black pepper on damn near everything. I went to his farm to hold down there and take care of his dogs and chickens until they could be rehomed. While I was there, my stepbrother came to visit to keep me company for a day, and we lit a fire in the backyard fire pit and cracked a few beers. Half hour into our conversation, a bald eagle buzzed us. This was literally less than 5 feet over our heads. It wasn't going after prey and had no reason to fly that low, other than to get a good look at us and let us know it was there. There's no doubt in my mind that was my dad. After my stepbrother left, I was walking in the house. There's a back door that leads straight into the kitchen, with a spice rack next to it. As I'm opening the door, a single container of black pepper flies off the shelf and lands about 4 feet away. There were a bunch of other spices on the shelf that didn't get moved, just the black pepper. also dead. I immediately pour a little bourbon, and another, and another. That night, I got roaringly drunk. I cried my eyes out, howled at the moon, and screamed in the heavens. Everything I ever wanted to say to my dad, but I didn't get a chance to. I walked into the kitchen the next morning to find one of the mouse traps up on one edge. There's no way that happened naturally. I know my dad heard me, wherever he is. During the clean-out, I pulled my dad's wind-up clock off the wall. This was a clock that my dad had built the casing for, but hadn't worked in several years since my stepmother died. Dad, me, and my brother had all taken a crack at fixing it to no avail. It was a pretty clock, but if it didn't run, it was going to be given to charity. I pulled it off the wall and set it on the front porch, and lo and behold, it starts ticking. My wife's mouth fell open, and that both sent shivers down our spines. It was Dad telling me, "Don't give the clock away," and it now hangs in my house. And finally, after the funeral, 6 months after his passing, we returned to the farm to bury his ashes. While packing up and about to leave the following morning, the rooster shows up. It was the exact breed my dad had. It came walking along the street, turned to the center of the long driveway, and walked straight up to the house. There's a section of the front yard where Dad had buried his past dogs. The rooster walks straight up to the gravesite, pecks around for a minute, looks at me, clucks, then turns, walks out the gate and into the cornfield. Dad was the only person within 5 miles that had that breed of chicken, New Hampshire Red. I also think that was my dad, coming to say hello. There was a guy who I used to work with called Dan. Dan was a chill guy who everyone got on with, but was a little weird at times. He used to believe in a lot of things: aliens, ghosts, government experiments, the lot. He wasn't religious, but that's besides the point. While messing around at work, he explained stupid things to us about how he's seen spaceships and how all this paranormal stuff happens when he's at home. Some of it is quite ridiculous, but I listen anyway. A few weeks later, he invites me for a round of beers. I was driving, so I couldn't really drink, but I still went over. We got on the subject of ghosts, and he starts explaining things to me, like how he was once eating an apple, and it just exploded as he went to take a bite. I laughed it off, and thought it could have just been some sort of pressure with the way he was holding it, causing it to explode.
Icky,
But he was deadly
stinky,
serious,
right?
and pulled out a few pictures of this apple, and started showing me the damage it had done to him. There was a picture of him with a cut on his cheek caused by the apple.
Come here then.
However, I was still unconvinced this meant there was a ghost in his house. He wasn't messing around, and told me to hold on, and that he'd show me something. And he pulls out of this shoebox, full of pictures from around the house, and just says, "Flick through those, you'll see." With a deep sigh, I say, "Okay." I go through these pictures of a recent Christmas, the usual photos, kids opening presents, the family having Christmas dinner, having a few drinks at night, a group shot. That's when I stop. This was the photo that left me in awe. His family was standing in front of this mirror, and I kid you not, in the reflection of the mirror was an Edwardian girl, smiling straight at the camera.
Don't even do it.
This was not one of those could be a smudge type of thing. It was not hidden behind someone can barely make it out either. No. This was a clear, colored, taken photograph, with the girl's reflection being black and white. You could make out her face, her smile, her clothes, her hands, everything. It doesn't end there though. Dan says to me,
Told you I wasn't kidding you. I go to the next photo. Same sort of thing. Family members have moved around and so had the girl. She's doing a different pose. She's smiling now and showing her teeth. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was this black and white girl, standing right in the mirror smiling at me, like she'd been there the whole time. I felt like someone had just thrown a bucket of ice-cold water over me, like I was being watched, like I wasn't welcome anymore and felt like I needed to leave. I put the photos back in the box and left shortly after. I still don't believe in ghosts or aliens or anything like that, but I know what I saw, and I know that it scared the hell out of me.
I used to work quite late at the University of South Florida, as I like to do my work when no one else is around. My apartment is just a short ways off, roughly a 10-minute drive or 40-minute walk away depending on what I do. So while I do live in Tampa and it's far and away from the cities, no 3-story buildings in sight, a few neighborhoods, ample amounts of trees and ponds, and a stone's throw away from a rather sizable state park of 240 acres, which in turn is adjacent to a substantially larger wilderness area. What that means is a lot of wildlife. I regularly see deer grazing on the golf course nearby, growling alligators roaming the ponds, and small lakes turtles abound. Plenty of vultures, storks, and smaller birds and much more on my nightly walks or drives. I've often seen and heard foxes, bobcats, coyotes, and even a black bear once. So as you can imagine, when I found out several cats and a small dog had gone missing, I naturally thought that if a predator was responsible, it would be one of the larger coyotes, bobcats, or maybe even a bear or gator. People, especially in gated communities, leave their pets out to roam about the day or night. Still, that did leave the question of how a predator could or would get over several fences and gates, some of which would be quite a hassle to climb. There was no signs of being tunneled under. So why go for a pet inside a box that would be harder to get out of, and fat ducks were extremely hungry? Well, I got my answer in one way I never expected. I was driving back from the lab late at around 11 p.m. when I stopped, as I could see an animal on the road. The figure was very tall but also very thin, so I initially thought the pale color to be from a deer from the rear. However, I soon noticed the animal was actually pale all over its main body. It had extremely thin dark legs, and when it raised itself up, I noticed I was looking at a great white heron from behind. Great white herons are a regional color morph of great blue herons. I'm a 16-year-old girl and work as a waitress at a restaurant. There are a lot of other girls around my age who also work as waitresses. Each waiter/waitress has a certain section of tables to serve. I haven't worked here for very long, but worked here long enough to manage a section on my own. I'm fairly friendly with my co-workers, so when one of the janitorial workers would make small talk with me, I didn't think anything of it. He'd talk to me fairly often, as I would often see him working in my section when I'd come out to clear tables. I figured it was pure coincidence. I was taking a break in the back room eating my dinner when the janitor guy walked in and sat down at the table behind me. He sat again, made small talk, literally nothing super important, and as I inhaled my pancakes, one of the other girls walked in and we began to chat for a while. The janitor left about 5 minutes into me and the other girl's conversation, and I again didn't think anything of it. While I was cleaning up, I thanked the girl for talking to me and she said, "Oh, I just came in to make sure you weren't alone. No one should be alone with him." I later learned from the other teenage girls that the guy had a habit of pestering them, being generally creepy, and following them to their car while he was a middle-aged man. I was freaked out and of course, looking back, I'm 80% sure the dude was following me around while I worked in my section. So to the creepy janitor dude, please get lost.
Oh,
This happened last year. My friend and I were coming back to my town after hanging out across the state line, when this lady started flashing her brights to my friend to go faster. We were going the speed limit and it was dark
oh,
and
he
hard to
definitely
see.
saw that.
After a while, she pulls to the side of us, which she could have done the whole time, and we can hear her yelling at us like a banshee through our rolled up windows. In our state, several people have been shot over road rage, so my friend grabs for her phone in case something starts going down. As she's reaching, the car swerves slightly towards the lady and she recovers. The lady screams even louder and gets behind us again, riding our bumper. We come to the first exit for the town I live in, and I told my friend to take it so we could not have this crazy lady next to us. She follows us to the exit, so I have my friend turn into a parking lot. The lady followed us but got caught by a red light, so we leave the parking lot back to the highway, and she comes right back at us again. Luckily, a truck pulled out and blocked her vision of us, and we made a right turn when the traffic allowed on a red light and swerved between cars to put as much distance between us as possible. We finally lost her after she had been following us for 11 miles.
When I was 10, I was spending the night at a friend's house, and my buddy and I were sleeping downstairs in the front room. This house had an old dirt wall basement cellar that none of the kids were ever allowed to go into, the entrance of which was a door in the hallway that connected the front room to the kitchen. At about 1 or 2 in the morning, I wake up to the sound of the door opening and closing, and I look in that direction and see my buddy's little sister exit the cellar and walk quietly towards the kitchen. Thinking to myself, there's no way that my buddy's 5-year-old sister snuck downstairs to the basement and back again into the kitchen, I get out to go investigate. As I'm walking down the hallway, I can hear her shuffling around. I finally reach to where I can see into the kitchen and look directly at her. She's standing on her tippy toes, reaching a large glass jar filled with granola bars. As she's pulling a granola bar out, I call her name. She quickly turns around on her heels and with a shocked look on her face, and I flip the light switch on. She completely disappears, and the granola bar falls to the ground. As you can imagine, I freak the hell out, run back to the front room and cover myself with blankets and don't sleep the rest of the night. By 7 a.m., my buddy's parents are coming downstairs, carrying the little sister, grumbling that they didn't get enough sleep because she slept in their bed all night, and then proceeded to wake us up and scold us for leaving the jar of granola bars open all night.
Once upon a time, I lived on South Beach, Miami, and worked at a local alternative clothing store right on the main strip. One day in the middle of summer, I was at work with just the store owner with me there. It was slow season and the customers were scarce. So she made herself busy dressing mannequins on one side of the store while I sat folding shirts behind a display case on the other side. It was boring to say the least, but at one point the owner interrupted me to ask if I had seen her kids come through. They lived upstairs, so this would not have been unusual. However, I had not, and told her so. When I asked why, she said she could have sworn she heard some kids laughing and talking somewhere in the store, but I hadn't heard a damn thing. So she went back to her task, obviously confused. I resumed work folding the clothes and thought nothing more of it. All was quiet, completely unremarkable for the next 10 or so minutes, until a sudden movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. I then turned to look just in time to see my bottle of vitamin water launch itself from where it was sitting on top of the display case, slam into the wall 5 feet behind, and spill all over the floor. No joke. That bottle flew into the wall like it had been struck by a baseball bat hard enough to get a home run. I say that I was perplexed, and that's an understatement. I sat there frozen and stared at the mess as I struggled to comprehend what and how it happened. I would have been able to see someone if they'd have thrown it, and no one was around, not a soul. But it wasn't physically possible, right? My brain felt like it was going to short circuit. A few moments later, I was still staring stupidly at the mess when the owner walked up to check on me. "Is everything all right?" she asked when she saw what happened. I didn't know what to say, but I think I mumbled something about the bottle getting knocked off the counter, and I told her I would clean it up right away. Satisfied but still confused, she shrugged and walked away. Now this is where it gets really wild. If you've ever seen a vitamin water cap before, you know it's made of quite hard, thick plastic that is nearly impossible to break without some sort of tool. So whatever quantum force decided to make an example out of my bottle that day must have been especially powerful, because the impact it had made against the wall split the cap clean through the center, sending both pieces flying in opposite directions before they hit the floor. I'm just glad I wasn't in the way. So take it from me, poltergeists don't mess around.
So I was about 7 years old when this happened. My dad and I had stopped at a fast food restaurant in a pretty shady area because he had to use the bathroom. There weren't that many people dining in there, and the restrooms were in the very back, like in most fast food places. My dad told me to stay at the table right outside the bathroom and that he'd be right back. I wasn't too worried because although I didn't like being left alone, my dad always made sure to be super quick in public bathrooms so that I wouldn't be left alone for too long. But almost immediately, after he went in, I felt eyes on me and noticed there was a small group, maybe of 3 to 5 older men, all in their late 50s, sitting a few tables away. They were all staring at me simultaneously without speaking, and I remember feeling kind of scared because it was so odd, even as a little kid who didn't really know what was going on. So one of them says fairly loudly, and I remember this so vividly, "Wow, look at that pretty little girl over there all alone. We should do something about that." And they all burst out laughing. I felt so much dread at this point. I didn't know what they meant, but I knew they were bad. Fortunately, my dad came out moments later. I whispered something to him that I don't remember, but I think he could tell something was wrong by how scared I looked. And without saying anything, he walked out with me, and we rushed to the car. We never talked about it, but after that day, my dad would always take me into the public bathrooms with him. I know this might not be the creepiest story, but it was scary enough that combined with some other experiences, I don't think I can ever fully 100% trust a man to not be creepy or want to hurt me. So, everlasting trauma is certainly fun. I used to work quite late at the University of South Florida, as I like to do my work when no one else is around. My apartment is just a short ways off, roughly a 10-minute drive or 40-minute walk away depending on what I take. So while I do live in Tampa and it's far and away from the cities, no 3-story buildings in sight, a few neighborhoods, ample amounts of trees and ponds, and a stone's throw away from a rather sizable state park of 240 acres, which in turn is adjacent to a substantially larger wilderness area. What that means is a lot of wildlife. I regularly see deer grazing on the golf course nearby, growling alligators roaming the ponds, and small lakes turtles abound. Plenty of vultures, storks, and smaller birds and much more on my nightly walks or drives. I've often seen and heard foxes, bobcats, coyotes, and even a black bear once. So as you can imagine, when I found out several cats and a small dog had gone missing, I naturally thought that if a predator was responsible, it would be one of the larger coyotes, bobcats, or maybe even a bear or gator. People, especially in gated communities, leave their pets out to roam about the day or night. Still, that did leave the question of how a predator could or would get over several fences and gates, some of which would be quite a hassle to climb, and there was no signs of being tunneled under. So why go for a pet inside a box that would be harder to get out of when fat ducks were extremely abundant? Well, I got my answer in one way I never expected. I was driving back from the lab late at around 11 p.m. when I stopped as I could see an animal on the road. The figure was very tall but also very thin, so I initially thought the pale colour to be from a deer from the rear. However, I soon noticed the animal was actually pale all over its main body. It had extremely thin dark legs, and when it raised itself up, I noticed I was looking at a great white heron from behind. Great white herons are a regional colour morph of great blue herons being nearly all white in coloration, including the trademark tassels coming off the brows of the birds, save for the top jaw and feet, which are both dark blue or black. The white form usually only appears in very southern Florida, but occasionally one will show up further north. They also tend to be on the larger end of the species size. I make no jest when I note how big this avian was. Standing up straight, the biggest great herons can look a grown man in the eye behind nearly a foot-long rapier-shaped beak. The heron was throwing its head up and down and clearly doing something, but I wasn't sure what. I was standing in the road about 20 yards ahead of the car and could only react when I got closer. It swung its head around, and I'll never forget the sight as I stopped 10 yards away. The heron was standing still, unflinching, as its eyes brightly reflected in the headlights. The white feathers across the chest and part of the wing was stained in a tarry red from coagulated blood, as it had half of a cat hanging out of its mouth. Herons can gulp down surprisingly large prey, such as big fish, muskrats, bullfrogs, and even young alligators. But it's one thing to see them swallow a wild creature whole, in still frame or in pixel on a video. It's a whole different ordeal to see one doing it in the flesh, after having killed its prey by impaling it on its beak. When I compared the beak to a rapier earlier, I meant it. They can impale that thing through the armored scales of a garfish. Herons have been known to kill eagles by ramming their beaks through the latter's chest. Poor cat never stood a chance. The heron didn't seem at all fazed by my arrival. Instead, it flicked the dead cat back and forth into position in its mouth before tilting its head up. You know that shot from Jurassic Park when the Tyrannosaurus swallows a goat? Same sort of visual at first, only with another disgusting detail. When the heron started swallowing, its thin neck bulged outwards to accommodate the food. It kept its eyes pointed straight at me as the big wad of slain feline slowly worked down its throat to the crop, sometimes a limb visibly impressing towards the outstretched skin. All the while the heron let out raspberry breaths while standing tall, still spattered in gore from pecking on the poor pet to death. And after it finally swallowed its prey, the heron paced closer to the side of the road. It actually got next to the car at one point and was close enough I could confirm its height to be about 5 feet or more, because the top of its back was level with my side mirror. It was at that point I realized I had the windows partially rolled down and was smelling sanguine musk of death. The damn bird was nearly level with my window, looking right at me and leaning closer. Needless to say, that snapped me out of my stupor. I blared the horn to make it back off. On the menu or not, I didn't like how it was looking at me. Driving down the road and making the turn, I could still see it looking towards the car as it paced down the darkened sidewalks like it was the most casual thing ever. A 4 to 5 foot tall predator half covered in blood just to be there. Obviously I was in no direct danger myself being in the car, and decidedly not on the menu, but I didn't like the way it looked at me. This avian predator clearly didn't at all fear people, even if it seemed conscious of cars and my presence. And given this happened in a gated community, I'd never seen any mammalian predators bigger than a possum in. I think I now know what was eating those pets. We often can hear nowadays that birds are living dinosaurs, but I don't think some quite register that the featherheads they're familiar with are fat city pigeons or delicious fowl. I think seeing this would help get the message across. And at night, every so often, I can still hear the deep, throaty shrieks that species gives off from flying over the forests and swamps and into the neighborhoods. Don't leave your pets out, people. Let me preface this by saying that while I was pregnant, a colleague of mine with whom I was close had started coming with me any time I left the office to do anything. Pick up records, shop during lunch, grab something to eat, because she was adamant that a young, heavily pregnant girl shouldn't be out by herself. Too many horror stories about pregnant women being taken or cut open for their babies and stuff. She would say that, and no matter where we went, she would always have an absolutely true story about someone she knew personally who had been stalked or threatened or nearly abducted while pregnant. At the time, I brushed off her warnings as utter nonsense. Skip forward a few months. I was 23 and a new mother confined at home on maternity leave. I'm very excited for my first daytime excursion out the house with my infant son, who was 2 to 3 months old at the time. My husband wasn't too thrilled at the prospect of me going out alone with our son while he was at work, especially in my pre-mum car, a white Mustang GT convertible. But he begrudgingly accepted on the condition that I swap cars with him for the day, since he drove the Ford Explorer we had purchased in anticipation of the baby's arrival. I'd only driven the truck once since we bought it, so I wasn't that familiar with it. Nonetheless, I loaded it up with the stroller, the car seat, a diaper bag overflowing with nearly all of our baby gear, and a 6-month emergency supply of formula. You know, just in case. I was only running out to do errands and planned to stop at Target, the grocery store, and pick up a few things for lunch on the way home. My first stop was Target, where I relished my newfound freedom, not paying nearly as much attention to my surroundings as I should have been. But on my way in, one thing did catch my eye. An average-looking white guy in his late 20s to early 30s, average height, with dark blonde hair, wearing a tight, light grey t-shirt and nerdy glasses, leaning against the wall leading to the store exit. I immediately felt a wave of terror wash over me, but I convinced myself there was absolutely nothing abnormal about him to warrant my worry, and I brushed it off as new mum paranoia. Next, I made my way to the grocery store, where I parked towards the back of the parking lot to avoid smashing into any other cars, since I had no practice parking such a big truck. As I hopped out the driver's seat, another completely normal thing grabbed my attention. A compact red Chevy parked 2 lanes over from me, with a good 12 to 15 spaces between it and the car parked next to it. I had parked far back for a reason. I remember thinking the Chevy had no similar discernible reason, but again, I'm a paranoid mum with an already paranoid nature, so I ignored it. I did make note, however, that I thought the Chevy had parked there before me. I would later realize it had followed me there, but the driver still hadn't gotten out, even though I had pulled in after it, and spent a good 10 minutes getting the baby into the stroller before going in. You would think the driver would have gone into the store by now. Over an hour later, I returned to the truck and scanned the parking lot. There was the red Chevy, still parked in the same spot, the driver still in his seat. Again, I rationalized that he must have gone in after me, and somehow had people finishing just before me. Otherwise, he'd had to have been watching me. And rational people don't think other people are watching them, right? I packed everything up and headed across the street to the McDonald's drive-thru to pick up something to eat on my way home. The Chevy was following me, I noted, but while I pulled up to the speaker, he pulled into the back of the parking lot of an adjacent bar and parked facing me. Logic would normally overcome at this point, but I was determined not to be crazy, so I collected my food and decided to prove once and for all that the Chevy wasn't following me. I left the drive-thru and headed back to the grocery store, where I had first noticed the Chevy since he was still there. I thought he would have no reason to go back unless he was stalking me, sure enough, he followed. Now hell-bent on proving myself wrong, I looped around the parking lot, crossed into the neighboring street, and back through the parking lot again. Something no one would have any reason to do unless you're trying to prove that you're being followed. Of course, to see if you followed. I had to repeat the loop 3 times before I was thoroughly convinced that I was being stalked. I finally allowed the fight or flight feeling I had been fending off all morning to take over. I suddenly thought of my colleague who had repeatedly told me to never drive straight home if I ever thought I was being followed. Knowing that I lived in a very remote area with no neighbors, I started to head for the police station. The only problem was, I hadn't thought to check the gas gauge, and since my idiot husband never stops for gas, the low gas warning chose to go off at that very moment. I knew I didn't have enough gas to make it to the police station, let alone home, and the Chevy had to know I was onto him by now, so I wasn't about to risk stopping to fill up. I started coming up with alternatives. I could call 911 from my cell phone, explain the situation, and have a police officer meet me in the middle before I ran out of gas. Brilliant, I thought to myself. And as I reached across the passenger seat to grab my cell phone, unfortunately, as I was unfamiliar with the truck, I didn't know that you weren't supposed to lay anything on the passenger seat. One sharp turn, and whatever was on it would slip across the seat and down into the space between the side of the seat and the door. I frantically patted down the entire seat before I realized my phone must have slipped, and there was no way I could reach it without pulling over and getting out. By now I was going 80 miles an hour down the highway, and the Chevy was right behind me. I peeked out the rearview mirror, and he was close enough for me to make out what he was wearing, a light grey t-shirt, and I recognized the nerdy glasses covering his determined eyes. I realized it was the totally normal guy I had seen standing at the exit of Target. He'd been following me for almost 3 hours by now. I suddenly understood the gravity of the situation. I wasn't crazy, I was being hunted. The last idea I could conjure up was to make a break from my husband's uncle and aunt's house. They lived in the neighborhood just next to the grocery store, and his uncle worked the swing shift, which meant he would be home right now. If I stayed in the truck and honked the horn, I could get him to come out and see what was going on. He's a badass kind of guy, definitely the kind you wouldn't want to annoy, and I knew he'd protect me and the baby. The only problem was, I was going in the wrong direction down the highway, and I'd have to take a jug handle and wait at the light to turn myself around. And by now I was sure that even a red light would be more than enough for this guy to bust open my window and end my life and steal my son. Then I recalled another bit of advice from my colleague. If you ever need help but you can't call for it, break the law and you'll get the police's attention. I decided my best course of action was to make an illegal U-turn at the next possible traffic light, and if the Chevy followed me, book it to my uncle's house. If my blatant traffic violation caused the attention of a nearby police officer, I could appeal for them for help, and his mere presence would likely scare the Chevy away. I passed 3 lights waiting to find a patrol car until I saw an opportunity. A very short gap in a barrage of lunch traffic spanning 4 lanes. Maybe, just maybe, I could pull off this U-turn and the Chevy would get stuck waiting for the traffic to pass before he could follow. I stayed in the left lane, and I approached the light, praying it would stay green long enough for me to make it, and tanked every pound of what little weight I had on the gas pedal. Right before I approached the light, it turned yellow, so I quickly turned the truck left and rammed it, crossing my fingers I didn't cause an accident. The tires squealed so loud I was sure I was going to flip the truck, but I kept going, ignoring the noxious smell of burning rubber, frantically checking behind me to see if it had made it. He was stuck at the red light, blocked by traffic, still facing in the opposite direction, pounding into his steering wheel. I drove around back roads near the highway for what seemed like an eternity, until the gas ran to E before I finally had the courage to stop. At the gas station, I got out to get my cell phone while the attendant pumped my gas, trying to conceal my violent trembling. I was too afraid to sit for long, so I waited until I was back on the road to call the police. By now I knew the Chevy had gone, but the dispatcher still sent an officer to meet me on the highway and lead me back to the station, just in case he was still looking for me. I was too consumed with escaping to catch its license plate. and I didn't know the color, make, nor model of the car, and I had gotten a pretty good look at the driver in Target. The police were able to get a photo of the driver and the car from the surveillance videos at Target and McDonald's, and I was pretty confident they'd find him. Unfortunately, by the time we had moved out of state,
Hey,
a year
hey,
later, they still had no
Mike,
clear
listen,
idea who
sorry.
the guy even
Listen to
was.
scary stories.
The fact that he was unsuccessful in his pursuit probably bumped the priority of my case to the bottom of the pile. Although the police department did spend quite some time investigating, fearing that he had succeeded before, or worse, that he might strike again. I'll probably never know what the guy's intentions truly were. The police, family, and friends have theorized everything from a stupid prank spawned from road rage to an easy rape to kidnapping my son. But I still shudder to think what would have happened had he caught me. And even now, 4 years and 5,000 miles away from the town where it happened, I still check the parking lot of every establishment I visit, just in case he found me and has come to finish what he started. If anything good did come from this, though, is that I learnt my lesson. No matter how crazy and paranoid my husband thinks I may be, I will always trust my gut when I feel like something's wrong. Oh, and now I always make sure to fill up the gas tank whenever it drops to half a tank, so I never have to worry about stopping for gas if I'm ever in a sticky situation again.
I used to work in a store built in a former World War II military hangar. I didn't think much of it until I went into a workspace that was the former Ready Room and saw some of the desks and counters were original. For some reason the hair lifted on my neck, and when I asked people working there about the area, they just shrugged and said it was haunted. Everyone knew that. And it was an eerie feeling, not creepy, but like being close but not in touch with an electric current. I always felt like time had bent on itself there, like the sailors were busy doing their jobs and so was I. They were nice though, always thinking quietly around us. One time I was looking for some tiny repair parts with no luck, and I finally asked, "Hey Dad, can you help me?" I walked around the table where I had just been to find a bag full of those parts sitting there alone. I said a nervous thank you and fled. Another time I was doing inventory alone, when a baby doll 2 miles away out of the blue asked, "Will you play with me?" I told it I was a little busy, but then decided it was time for a break. The present scared a lot of people worse than me. But it was pretty awesome, too, when you think about it. I only climbed up to the top of the tower when a frightened co-worker asked me to go with her, as it was just used for storage. At the top I didn't feel the presence as much as I did in the old Ready Room. Down there they had hung a curtain over a window that had once looked out to the hangar floor. With the interior shelf of the store in place, the window now looked into an attic of shadowy shapes, and no one wanted to look there too long. Still, I hold that there was no sense of evil, just the constant tingle saying you weren't alone. It was a cool space full of history, including a stairway banister covered with intricately knotted sailor rope work. "2 years ago, my family had our first Christmas at my grandmother's house, since my great-grandfather had passed away. There was a definite somber tone to the otherwise festive gathering, as he was a big part of our family get-togethers. Fast forward a few hours into night. My uncle, who was a bit of a disturber with a twisted sense of humor, started poking fun at silly things my great-grandfather used to do. It began harmless, but of course he took it way too far and started making fun of pretty rude things, like the fact he had a hard time chewing his food near the end of his life. Pretty horrible, I know. As soon as the statement left his mouth, the craziest thing I've ever experienced happened. My grandmother has a bookshelf in the living room where we were all situated in. One of the shelves, the second one from the top, was almost a mini shrine to him. Well, everything on that shelf went flying off, literally shot across the room and fell to the floor, as if someone had thrown it. The weirdest thing was nothing on any of the other shelves were touched, just the stuff on the one dedicated to him. No one was beside the shelf, and there were no windows open. Needless to say, my uncle was scared and bolted out of the room as we were all stunned. I have no logical explanation for what happened that night.
but we do like to say it was our grandfather, telling my uncle to smarten up one last time. About 20 years ago, I went to visit a relative who had just moved to our town. She invited me into her kitchen for tea. We sat at a little table in the corner, but at one point she left the room to go and get something. I don't remember what. I glanced over to the other side of the kitchen and saw a man hanging by the neck over the stove from one of those plant hanger hooks. Moments later, she returned and just said, not sure how you're going to feel about this, but I just saw a man hanging by the neck over there, and pointed to the stove. She asked, what did he look like? He had dirty blonde hair and moustache and wore a brown flannel shirt. She went white. After a minute of her just staring at me, she said, no one out here knows this, but the reason we moved from New York was because our roommate hung himself in our basement, and he looked like the man you just described. I also have another story. Early morning Thanksgiving 6 years ago, I was taking the turkey into a large roasting pan to my cousin's house so that she could cook it in her oven, because I had other baking to do and they had 2 ovens. Their house was and is at least 100 years old. When you enter the house through the front door, you can either go straight through a hallway to the kitchen or turn right to go into the living room. Off of the hallway to the kitchen there is a small bathroom with a door that opens out into the hallway. So my cousin's husband opens the front door and instead of taking the roasting pan from me, hurries to the hallway to shut the bathroom door that someone had left open. He steps into the bathroom and pulls the door closed so that I could make it through to the kitchen. As he's in the bathroom and I'm carrying an even heavier roasting pan, I feel an enormous amount of energy rush through my body, from behind me, through the front of me. And then I saw a very large man with dark, salt and pepper hair stomp away from me and go through the swinging door to the side dining room. I hurried to set the roasting pan down, and then went to the still swinging door to look in the dining room to see what the hell just happened. When I pushed the door open and looked in the dining room, there was dead silence and I was stunned. I turned back around and my cousin's husband was walking into the kitchen and said, "Did you see that?" His face was deadly serious. All he said was, "I don't want to talk about it." And they moved to another house a year or so later. My final story goes like this. I had come home from work for lunch. It's a 5-minute drive, and afterwards I was driving back to work but had to take a different route than usual, right past a very large and beautiful cemetery. The street is divided, one with large trees in the median, so I pulled out and turned left. There wasn't any traffic. It was a beautiful sunny day, and I've driven down that road about 10 yards, no traffic, no parked cars, when I looked out the passenger window and suddenly see a young man sitting there on the curb. He's wearing long jean shorts, a red t-shirt and a baseball cap, and he's sitting on the curb as if he's waiting for someone. It surprised me so much because I hadn't seen him when I looked, and I should have seen him. So when I passed him, I looked in my rearview mirror, but then there was no one. I pulled over and actually did a double take, and actually got out. There was still no one there. Fairly sure he was a ghost. Some years back, I was at university with a friend I'd known from school. We weren't best friends, but good mates. We'd known about each other and got on well enough. I knew that he was a spiritualist, and he'd sometimes talk about his spiritual guide and whatnot. Not really what I believe in, but each to their own. Anyway, we were both hanging around the halls of residence where I lived, as he lived in another hall, wasting time and watching crap on the tiny TV in the shared kitchen. We were waiting until 2 a.m, as that's when WWE, or WWF as it was called then, would be showing. As we didn't have Sky, cable for our American friends, we would often wait up in the halls, then walk down to the local 24-hour snooker/pool hall, which would show Sky Sports. Usually you could ask them to stick the wrestling on and turn the volume up. We're chatting a lot of rubbish and just watching stupid stuff on the TV. Can't remember what we were talking about, but I remember after that, it wasn't anything creepy. We hadn't been drinking or anything either, and we're all completely sober. We're chatting away when we realize we need to get down to the pool hall if we want to catch the wrestling. So we stick on our coats and continue our conversation as we're walking outside. Now it's the weirdest thing. The moment I walk through the door, I feel cold. Bear in mind, it's 2 a.m. This is England. Sometime in the spring, so it wasn't going to be warm out, but I mean, it's like I had chills running up and down my spine. Cliché? Perhaps. But the best way I can describe it, it is the slow feeling of creeping dread you get when you're watching some scary movie and the ominous music starts to play. I tried to shrug it off, but it's like the dread was increasing with each step down the street. The air actually felt heavy, like it was difficult to breathe. I know it sounds like any other creepypasta story, but it's the only way I know how to describe that horrible feeling in my gut. A minute out the door, I suddenly realized we were both silent. We were chatting and laughing as we left the halls, but our conversation seemed to have just faded out of existence. I remember looking down the street, thinking that perhaps this was me being nervous about any dodgy characters nearby, but the road was clear. It was a clear night, nothing out of the ordinary at all. But to me, there was this massive alarm going off in my head. I was terrified of something, and I didn't know what. Picking up on the silence finally, I simply said, air feels a little thick tonight. My throat was dry at this point. He looked at me with a pale face and said, "Oh God, you can feel it too." We managed to hold a halting conversation about what it could be, but it was difficult as we both felt sick to our stomachs. Finally, as we crossed the road, I remember my friend turning even more white and saying, "It's death. Death is here." I don't really remember much after we crossed the road. Weirdly, the strange feeling suddenly subsided and we both laughed it off, even though we'd both felt it. We made it to the pool hall, and I didn't think much of it for a few days. It wasn't until later in the week that I was walking from uni without my friend that I passed a building close to the halls on the road we'd crossed over where my friend had felt death. There were 3 police cars and an ambulance there. I remember watching in horror as a pair of coroners were removing a body wrapped up in black. We looked it up in the local paper the next day. Apparently, 3 homeless people had died together in the building after seeking shelter, and they'd been dead for a few days before being discovered and removed. Never did find out what they died of, and we didn't go see much wrestling after that.
Nothing can hold me. I was made for this.
You know how
Literally.
people say, trust your gut feeling? Well, here's how I learned to trust mine. When my girlfriend and I were traveling in Australia. We were both there on our working holiday visas and met each other at work. After nearly a year, my girlfriend's visa was about to expire, but mine lasted another 6 or 7 months due to working on a farm prior. Since we had spent most of our time in the beautiful city of Sydney, we were ready to see other parts of the country too. What most backpackers do is pay a company that takes them up the east coast by bus, or simply rent a camper van and drive to the coast themselves. We chose the latter option with a few changes. We were going to start the journey by bus up to Brisbane, and from there rent a car that would take us all the way up north, from which eventually we would take a plane to Asia. So the day came. We said goodbye to our workplace and our friends that we had made during our stay and went off. After a few days in and around the area of Brisbane, we started looking to rent a van. Not having a lot of money and wanting to save what we had for other adventures, we eventually settled on renting the smallest and cheapest Subaru that we could find, since we figured it would be uncomfortable to sleep in the car, and bought a tent instead. This car was even so small that it came with a map showing where we were allowed to drive and which roads that it would be too tough. So the journey continued, and with the help of our rental, we had the option to visit less known or touristy places. We saw some really amazing things along the coast, and since we had enough time, we decided to see some of the real Australia. You know, the rustic desert with red sand that you'd see on postcards of the outback. So the next day we changed our course from north and started going west. The GPS was showing a drive of about 10 to 11 hours, until our goal, which was a small town in the middle of nowhere. Not too bad. I was the only one with a driver's license, and I had done trips like this before.
Yeah, I'm doing good. We're just
Leaving the
listening to
coastline
scary
behind,
stories.
it didn't take long for the climate to change, and soon we found ourselves in places just like those on the postcards. The ocean wasn't the only thing we left behind. It seemed the further away we got, the lesser civilization we saw, which was understandable. And we had gone way past the area we were allowed to drive in with our little car. We weren't worried though. The roads were all kept well, and this was our trip which we were going to enjoy. This meant taking a lot of breaks for pictures and to take in the new landscape and scenery, which in turn made it a longer drive. Eventually the sun started to set as we headed towards the horizon. Now here is a thing that you need to know about driving in Australia. You need to be very careful while driving at night, or preferably do not drive at night at all. This is due to the amount of kangaroos crossing the road, with some of them being as large as a fully grown man. How many people told me this before our trip? So many. But during
too,
our
dude.
drive,
Me too.
we were so far away
I am tired
and
as
hadn't
hell.
seen a single one, and figured that people must have been exaggerating. Now as the sun started to set, and we actually saw a kangaroo for the first time. It was nice, seeing it up close. We soon realized what people had been telling us was true. With the sun gone, the sides of the road started to fill with them. It was almost like something out of a vampire or zombie movie. After a few close calls, we had to slam on the brakes to not hit any crossing animals, and we eventually just kept a very slow pace. This, of course, meant an even greater delay in our drive. After a while of driving like this, and when daylight was completely gone, we came across a small town. Being quite hungry, and not knowing how long it would be to the next town, we decided to stop and see if we could find anything to eat. This place we had just ended up gave us a bit of a freaky vibe. Maybe it was just because we were in the middle of nowhere, and we both came from the city. Perhaps it was because the place was so badly lit, and there probably wasn't more than 10 houses. My city brain probably freaked out a bit and thought, this looks like the hills have eyes. At least it had a bar and a restaurant. The place was probably frequented by truckers going through these roads. We entered, and I guess every person in the town must have been there, which weren't much, along with one or two truckers. My girlfriend and I stuck out like sore thumbs. As soon as we sat down and ordered our food and drinks, the people next to us, it may have been some sort of family, sat down by the table next to ours. We ate. I didn't pay them much attention. That is until I heard something they said, which made my ears grow wide and a chill that ran down my spine. Now I can understand that people living out there would have fun spooking the tourists coming through, and I'm not sure if that's what their intentions were. But it got my attention as they uttered, "Wolf Creek." If you've been in Australia, you may have heard about the story. I don't think any traveller there hasn't heard of it. Looking back at it, it sometimes felt like a mythological creature you would tell your kids about to scare them. Except, these stories are true. Wolf Creek is a movie based on a serial killer who targeted backpackers travelling in desolate places in the 90s. I guess it happened in various ways, but he often incapacitated and tortured his victims before ending them. As you can understand, it is a nightmare for backpackers. However, fortunately for everyone, he was eventually caught and imprisoned. What this group of people next to us were talking about was that the police had arrested the wrong guy. and that the real Wolf Creek killer was still out there. I was sitting there listening to every word coming out of their mouths while my blood was running cold, and trying not to seem disturbed in front of my girlfriend, who didn't notice the conversation taking place. Again, I'm not sure if they were just full of rubbish and were trying to scare us, but I was getting freaked out. As we finished eating and paid, we were leaving, and the trucker sitting in the bar turned to me and said something like, "You really should stay here for the night. You're a fool if you're going to try and drive away at this time." Well, I sure as hell wasn't going to stay there with my girlfriend. I turned the door handle and walked out. Before driving off, I actually checked everything about the car to make sure no one had been messing with it while we were eating, but couldn't find anything wrong with it. As soon as we left the town, however, I started to understand what the trucker had been saying. If it was bad before, it was worse now. Kangaroos were running everywhere. I'm pretty sure we hit one small, poor creature. And I'm saying pretty sure because I didn't want to get out to check even if I did. That's how bad my gut feeling about this place was. It made us eventually have to drive even slower than before, and we were now pushing 30 kilometers an hour. A grueling and excruciatingly slow pace. This was absurd. At this speed we would have to drive all night just to get to the next town. When I looked back in the rearview mirror, I started to
Where's
get
my team? What are you guys
even more
fucking doing back there?
bright headlights coming up behind us fast. At the time we had been driving for about half an hour out of town, and I couldn't see any trace of anyone, just us and another car out of nowhere. And I do mean nowhere, except for our lights and the lights following. It was pitch black. You might think I was too chicken to consider our circumstances. I bet you would too. You couldn't see anything except the part of the road that was illuminated. As the car came closer and closer, I got tender and tender until it was right behind us, lighting up our whole car. Then it just passed us. It was a massive pickup with a metal bumper guard in front of it. You could see how this guy could keep his speed. He had no respect for wildlife. As we took advantage of the moment and picked up our own speed to follow the car, we could see the unlucky kangaroos flying off his bumper guard. Well, that was all the excitement we had for the night. After a few hours, we could see the lights from the next town, which we had discovered was a bit larger and had a nicer feeling to it. We took into a hotel for the night and slept far into the next day. We weren't in a hurry to leave. In the morning, we took our time in staying in the area and having a late breakfast. The GPS said that it would be at least another 4 hours until we could reach our destination. We were on the road again in the afternoon, and in daylight, we could see what happened to the unlucky kangaroos that had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The sides of the road were filled with carcasses, some new, some old, some probably had to have been there for years. We later learnt it hadn't rained in the area for about 6 years. So everything that died didn't decompose but simply dried out. And I guess there weren't that many animals out there that would eat bodies, at least not this amount. The stench was horrible. Every time we took a break and got out the car, I really don't think there was an area next to the road that didn't have some sort of bones or fur for the entirety of the road. As the sun started to set, we got a bit anxious again. We really didn't want to have to redo the experience from the night before. The signs were all there, and the kangaroos were lining up like zombies just as before. However, as the sun had passed beyond the horizon, we saw our goal. We had chosen this town since it was known to have dinosaur tracks and fossils in the area, and we noticed as we entered between the buildings, and it was way bigger with more people and tourists than the town that we had been driving past. That doesn't say much. You could probably walk from one end to the other in 10 minutes, but compared to the other towns, it was a metropolis. We asked around the town hotel and the camping grounds if they had any space for us, but they were all fully booked. Understandably, we were probably the last people to enter for the day. At least we got somewhere to eat while we planned how we would sleep for the night. Since we didn't want to be rude to other people living there, we thought it wouldn't be a good idea to sleep on the street in our car, and both agreed not to sleep in the tent we bought because of snakes and spiders. Well, Eventually, we came up with the idea to park just outside of town and sleep in our car there. We found a spot that usually must have been used for truckers to park. It was dark, so I'm not sure that the ground was made of asphalt. And we could just make out the signature of the bus standing in the dark. The bus driver must have either slept in there or wasn't. In front of us was the town, illuminated by the street lights, and behind us was absolutely nothing. It almost felt like being on the edge of drifting into the universe. If we would have continued in the direction right back from where we were standing, you could probably have driven for days without seeing another human or anything man-made. The map showed no roads or settlements in that direction for ages. We made ourselves as comfortable as we could in our small car and said goodnight before trying to fall asleep. Maybe it's just something that automatically kicks in at night, but it's a really uneasy feeling that was upon me, and the conversation between the people yesterday was still ringing in my ears. The townspeople had long since gone to bed, and it was dead silent. Actually, everything was dead silent. Not a bird or insect was making a sound, not even the wind. Before I started to doze off, I looked at the dashboard. 12 a.m. it said. Suddenly, my eyes flung open, and my girlfriend grabbed my arm and was holding a tight grip, looking at me with fear in her eyes. What's wrong? I don't know. Something feels wrong. I understood. I could feel it too. The bad gut feeling was turned up beyond maximum. The clock on the dashboard showed 2 a.m. I looked around through the car window. It was difficult to see anything since we had fogged up the glass with our breath. The bus, however, was no longer in its place. It was now just us. We were all alone. Suddenly a loud bang sounded from right behind the car. It was the sound of metal to metal, and I could feel my heart beat so hard and could even feel the pressure all the way down to my toes. Go, my girlfriend screamed, and I couldn't agree more. I stuck the keys in the ignition and started the engine as quickly as I could. It's lucky we had rented an automatic car, because I'm sure I would have panic stalled in another. All the birds were screaming and shouting as loudly as they could from the bushes and trees around us. They all knew that something dangerous was about. Dust and gravel were flying around the tires as we sped out of the rest stop. I didn't really know where we were going, but I just knew that I wanted to get the hell out of that place. We reached the town centre. In the square, we looked around to see if anyone was following us, and noticed several other cars and trucks being parked around us with people sleeping in them. This gave us some assurance that our hearts could slow down a bit. After a while sitting there, going through what happened, I guess my girlfriend fell asleep. Or maybe, like me, she just appeared to be. I kept at least one eye open, until it started to get light out about 3 hours later. When we both awoke again, the sun was already far in the sky, and people were out and about on the streets. As I was about to open the door, I noticed a large greasy handprint on the driver's side window. I'm not sure if it was there when I eventually closed my eyes a few hours earlier, or if it had been planted there afterwards. As I looked at the dashboard again to see what time it was, something else caught my attention. The indicator showing which doors were open, and it showed that the door behind me wasn't closed. I looked behind me, and sure enough, when I stepped out to check, I noticed that it wasn't. I'm not sure if it was us who didn't manage to close it completely the previous night, but what I do know is that we had slept with the doors locked. But if one door had been open, that means anyone could have gotten in. Yet again, I don't know if someone was just playing a prank on us, or if it was something more sinister. When we talked about it later, my girlfriend had been thinking it had something to do with aliens. She had quite a phobia of them, and there have been several strange sightings in the outback of Australia. However, my thoughts regarding the night's events made me remember the conversation about Wolf Creek Killer, and how they said he was never dead. What scared me the most about this incident wasn't the loud banging behind us or the handprint on the window, or even that the door had stayed open. What scared me the most was that both of us, me and my girlfriend, felt that unexplainable feeling of terror that made us wake up in the night. It's that feeling that is now convincing me it wasn't just someone playing a prank, but actually someone wanting to harm us. After we had woken up in that morning, we had our breakfast and everything felt great again, and the gut feeling that I had been having for the last few days was gone. The rest of our trip went great, and without any more scary incidences. However, it did teach me one thing: to always listen to my gut.
Throw it on the old TV and chill.
Once, my husband and I went into a restaurant that was laid out in an L shape. The order counter was in the front, short part of the L, and the seating in the back, the longer part of the L. This happened in Visalia, California. We were far away from home with our 3 small kids visiting my mom in the hospital when we stopped for lunch. We chose to sit all the way in the back of the L shape. There was a large mirror on the back wall, so I sat facing it. There were big glass windows near us, facing the parking lot. We were almost finished with our meal when I noticed an extremely intense, angry-looking man coming directly towards us from the parking lot. It was weird because there was no entrance close to our table. Right away I got a very nervous, sinking feeling, which I tried to hide from the kids. It was almost as if the creep knew we were there before he saw us. He stared right at us with an angry face and furrowed brows from the outside as he stalked towards the bend of the L shape where the entrance was. I elbowed my husband and quietly told him to be on alert. The man took a seat at the table behind us without ordering food. He sat there scowling directly at us. We could see him in the mirror. I got the feeling we were in his seat. Nervous freight waves refracted from my body as I tried to keep my cool. Hubby and I gathered the kids and herded them outside. They were all under ages 5 and below. The man stood up and followed us to the exit. Then halfway through the parking lot, my husband whispered to me our only plan. If the man accosted us from behind, we would turn on our heels and ram him physically to knock him to the ground. I'd call 911 while my husband would sit on top of him, this nutcase. Thank heavens the angry man stopped and returned to his seat at the restaurant. Perhaps he feared someone else may take his seat. We set a new world record that day for strapping 3 kids in car seats and screeching away down the street. My name is Gary, and this happened to me in my senior year of high school. I live in West Tennessee and we usually get 2 or 3 snow days a year. The area isn't used to much snow, so normally a small amount could get us out for the day. This particular day should have been a snow day, but for whatever reason the school decides the roads were safe enough to drive on, even though some patches of the road had ice on them. We were all annoyed but went to school anyway. Then after school got out, I went to my friend John's house and we hung out and played video games till it got dark and I decided to drive home. Mind you, the roads had gotten a little better but some ice was still there. It's about a 15-minute drive from John's house to mine, but I was trying to be extra careful not to hit any ice, so it was going to take a little longer than usual. Pulling out of John's neighborhood, there's a blind hill behind you that always stresses me out, because if someone came through there fast, they could rear-end me. The road isn't very busy, so it's never been a big deal, but this time a car comes over the hill right as I pull out, and they had to slam on the brakes because I pulled out in front of them. In my defense, they were going way too fast, but I still felt bad about it. They laid on the horn and were clearly angry at me, and I gave a small apology wave and went on my way with them still behind me. 10 minutes later, they're still behind me and tailgating me with their brights on, making it harder for me to see. I was getting nervous because they were clearly very angry, and I realized by this point that they were following me. I didn't know what to do, and definitely didn't want to lead them to my house, so I started taking random turns trying to lose them, but they were right on me the whole time. Eventually I started driving faster, so that maybe I could get enough distance between us so that I could make a turn they wouldn't see. But that was a big mistake. In hindsight, I should have driven to the police station, but for whatever reason, I thought this was the best idea. Going a good deal over the speed limit, I find a turn and begin to slightly brake so I wouldn't turn full speed. But as I was beginning to turn, I hit a patch of black ice and my car slid off the road and into a small ditch. Crap. I didn't want to floor it because I was afraid my car would tip over on its side, so I just sat there in disbelief until I look in my rearview mirror and see the car is now parked on the side of the road with the driver and passenger doors open. Before I knew it, my car door swings open, a man unbuckles my seatbelt and pulls me out the car. I really regret not locking my door because the man and his friends proceed to kick the crap out of me while I'm curled up in a ball and screaming for them to stop. They just keep cussing at me and kicking until they were safely satisfied and get in the car and drive off. At this point I was completely shaken and got back in my car and called for my mum. She told me to call the police and that she was on her way to collect me. The police arrived, but I didn't have much to tell them other than 2 guys in a sedan followed me from that neighborhood and beat me up. It was dark, so I didn't know what kind of car it was or what they looked like, so the cops never found out who did it. If I had just driven to the police station instead of trying to lose them myself, I could have saved myself a lot of pain.
I've had a few paranormal incidents myself. Something touching me just a few weeks ago, something saying my partner and my name in our ears one night was pretty disturbing. However, the freakiest thing I've heard is from my mother. When she was younger, she lived with her best friend in a 2-story house that was sectioned off into 2 living spaces. They lived upstairs and an old lady lived down. They said that from the beginning, everything just felt off. Anyway, their key cards kept going missing every few weeks. They would get new ones and the same thing would happen again. They said every night at around 1 a.m., if they looked out the windows into the backyard, there would be a man in all black with this huge, wide-brimmed hat on. He would just stand there and stare up at them and then vanish. After 6 months, they both decided to move out. They went back to make sure they had all of their stuff and opened one of the drawers, and there were all of the lost cards. That night, someone broke into their house and robbed and killed the old lady. My mum thinks the ghost of whatever it was trying to get them out of there just in time. It was a Sunday, early afternoon. The family had gone to church, and I stayed at home as I'm an agnostic and hate church. I was sitting in my bedroom fiddling with something. I can't recall what I was doing exactly when out of the corner of my eye I saw a creature. That's the best thing I can describe it. It looked like a small demon. It ran across my room towards the door. This happened within a fraction of a second, but the fear that ran through my body was intense. I'm just getting chills now remembering it. I quickly ran down the stairs to the closet, grabbed a baseball bat, and sat on the couch in the living room while waiting for my family to return. When they did, I slid the bat under the couch and made no mention of the event to my family. The best description I can give the creature is the resemblance of the warlock imp in WoW. Very small, very fast. Bear in mind this was several years before WoW even existed. I'm just giving you an idea of what it was that I saw. I'm currently reading through all of my old diaries from ages 11 to 22. I came across a night in question in the middle of an entry. When I was 12, my mum couldn't find a sitter for a late night meeting, so I had to go along with her, with my younger brother and a friend, Mac. We had to keep to ourselves. It was in a church at night. Naturally, a cemetery in the back was where we decided to play. My entry goes that we were in the cemetery in the dark. I screamed and hid behind a gravestone to scare them. My brother taught us a ritual to bring out spirits. You stand on a gravestone, say, "May rise" 10 times, and I stood on about 6 different stones and did them. Then I was standing on one, and Mac and my brother were facing me. Mac saw something walk towards them and then run. I saw a black something that was hunched over going behind a tree. My brother saw it too. Then we were up near the church, and I was able to stare at one right next to the tree. I stared for a while. It was moving its head a lot. Then it waved at me. Even Mac saw it too. Mac then said run, but I was left standing on the stone facing my brother, Mac, and the church, and a wooded area to the right. Mac said that he saw a tall robed person standing behind a stone after at the back of the cemetery. While we were making out what they were seeing, it appeared to be a few rows closer. They screamed and pulled me off the grave. I fell on my stomach and looked up to see my brother running towards the church spotlight, and I followed. I was computing what I thought was a hunched, robed person walking behind a tree within the woods next to our church. At the same time, they were absorbed in the figure behind me. It was very odd. I also want to point out that I completely forgot about the part where we stood under the light and stared at one next to the tree. All three of us stood there in silence for at least a few minutes, and I remember watching its head rotate around the shoulders like a pinwheel so fast it became blurry. When I was in college, it was the height of all the ghost hunting shows. I was always really interested in the possibility of it all since I was a kid. I didn't know if I believed in it or not. I just liked the idea of investigating it all. So I began doing research. I read books, watched documentaries, and studied different techniques. The more and more I learned, the more I realized that going into a situation looking for ghosts or spirits will completely ruin an investigation. What tends to happen with this mentality is that your brain starts finding things that aren't there. So I started to train myself to go into situations as a skeptic, and instead of looking for the paranormal, it was better to look for normal explanations for the abnormal. While doing this, I've met people from all walks of life who also adopted this method. We eventually made a club in our university that actually became the most active and sought-after club to be a part of. We were invited to houses, businesses, and historic parks, Gettysburg namely, to see what explanations and evidence we could find. We would hand-pick teams for special investigations if we considered them serious. We did this because the club was open enrollment, and while we could take days to have fresher courses or do and don'ts during investigations, there would still be people looking to find ghosts. Out of all the investigations we did, we had 3 places we went to that we could not explain what we had captured on video and sound. One was a theatre in our home city. The entire night we caught nothing and thought it was a bust. Even going through evidence, which we would do 3 times, provided almost nothing. Until a co-investigator's mother walked through the room where we were watching a tape of the entire theatre and said, "Who the hell's up there?" We made her show us. In the balcony seats, which were locked that night, and we were not allowed up there because of the antiques in it, there was a lamp lit behind a window curtain. You could see a figure move in front of the light of the lamp to almost block it completely. Similarly, as if you were to put a white sheet in front of a light to deaden the intensity of it. And then you could see something pull back the curtain a little bit, as if it were peeking out. The whole thing lasted about 15 seconds. We checked our records of where each group was at the time, and asked each person if they had been in the balcony. All responded no. We then asked our guide, who would unlock and lock the sections where we were investigating, to which she responds that she did not have a key to the balcony because of what was inside them. Regardless, she was with my group at the time of the event, and every other person of the investigation was accounted for, because we were able to match up timestamps from their recordings. The second is Gettysburg. There were 3 instances at Gettysburg that were unexplainable. This evidence has been lost because we did this investigation close to 7 years ago, when we were less organized. The first was a picture, one of the best I've seen. There were actually 3 pictures that ran together. The first 2
being just fog that seemed to have a blue hue to it, and the last one sending chills down my spine, because it was a clear as day man lying on a rock at Devil's Den, looking at little round Tom from the bottom, dressed in full Confederate garb. When first looking at it, it looked like the picture was distorted, until you realize you can make out the whiskers in his beard, and the gold in his patches on his hat and arms of his coat. The second, which I was not there for, was supposedly a piece of paper that was put on a rock in the woods that said, "What's your name?" They walked back about 40 feet or so and recorded and watched for half hour to make sure it wasn't tampered with. When they went back, there were clearly scribbles on the paper, but it wasn't anything legible. The third and final Gettysburg story is when I was walking through an area between the wheat field and Cemetery Ridge. I was with 2 or 3 others, and we had about 10 feet between us as we walked in line. This is all on digital record. You can hear something hit me in the back, like if someone threw a rock or something, and I stopped and said, "Ouch, Joe, what the hell, dude?" To which he says, he didn't do anything. At the time this happened, we were all stopped, and throughout the recording you can hear us all go silent, and in the distance hear a drum play a few beats. We didn't hear this at the time. We were stopped until we listened to the recording later, but Joe was mentioned previously as a drummer, and went white when he heard it. He listened a few more times before telling us it was a halt from a drum line. The third one is very lengthy, and I feel like I want to save it for another day. I do not currently do these investigations, and I'll be the first one in the room to be a skeptic with any paranormal claim, but there were a few times that I was stumped. I'm not saying I know if ghosts exist or not. I don't have that answer. I can, however, say that there are things in this world we do not understand. Throughout the years we did the club in the university, we became highly recognized, having been given awards from the school for what we have done in our investigations, tactics, and also community and charitable work. Doing investigations are absolutely not what you see on TV. They are much more boring, and you seldom have anything happen. But it's a labor of love. It's hard to explain. Because once you find that one piece of footage you can't explain, you want more. I know I'll get backlash from these claims. I always do when I post my experiences. But I promise on my parents' lives that what I say I did indeed happen. I have not tried to emphasize any of it, and I have told these stories as they happen. Let me take you back 10 years or so. It's 2 in the morning, not a breath of sound, and I sit at the dinner table under a single light bulb eating frosted flakes. I'm the only soul in the entire house. The family is gone, and the doors are all locked. I feel tired, but the cereal is delicious. When suddenly the light bulb flickers. Weird. That doesn't usually happen. Okay, back on, no problem. At least I can finish. That's when, not 4 feet away, the back door opens. Several things happened at that precise moment, and if you were able to capture it in slow motion, it would have looked like this. Milk and cereal splashing and scattering across the table. A spoon clinks on the floor. I have discovered the secret to human flight, and my body floats effortlessly 4 feet off the ground. My chair tumbles backward beneath me, but I give no heed. My mouth is open and hollow, unable to make a noise. My eyes are locked on the door. The door! It swings open to the fullest amount, but all I see is this blackness outside. When my feet touch the ground, I sprint several feet backwards and catch my breath. The door frame is still empty. Nothing appears to have moved. I don't feel any wind and I can't hear anything. What the hell? After I gather my courage, I investigate. The door handle is locked.
but it must not have clicked completely when it was shut. I think the house must have had some pressure change somewhere. And, I don't know, suction did it. Yeah, that must be. And the light bulb? It died, I think, a few days after. So, here's me hoping it was just random chance.
My sister
I hope.
cauterized her wound in holy fire. Mine remains.
This happened a few months ago. I'm a 23-year-old female and I finally bought a car for myself. I love driving around and listening to music alone or with my siblings. This very night it was around 7 p.m, winter time, and I took my two siblings, 18-year-old female and 13-year-old male, out for a drive after their consistent pleading because they were bored. Now I'm a smoker, and coming from a South Asian household, women aren't meant to smoke. So I took the opportunity to smoke without worrying that my parents would catch me. The city I live in has a good side and a bad side, and I lived in the very good side, or so I thought. A quiet, suburban area. I didn't hesitate to park somewhere, get out and smoke for a while leaning against my car, as I don't like smoking in my own car, and scrolling away on my phone. I parked underneath a lamppost and got out and lit my cig, and all was well. It was dark, but I wasn't scared as I visited that road regularly, and it wasn't too far from my aunt's house. As I lit up, I looked up from my phone and looked around to see a man walk out of the shadows from a bush. I didn't think anything of it. I see people going for walks all the time around here. He was at least 6'4", was on the opposite side view, and I assumed he was just going to carry on walking, so I carried on looking at my phone, until I look up to see him just standing there, fully facing me and watching me. My sister in the car must have been watching him too, and knocked on the window, telling me to come in. I had already butted out my cigarette, and was making my way to my car door, keys in hand, and the guy was still standing there completely still. I got in anyway, locked my door, and breathed a sigh of relief, thinking perhaps I was just overreacting. I put my key in the ignition, and I turned to see where the guy was, and I see that he's now behind my car, taking pictures of my car and my registration number. I rolled my window down the tiniest bit, and I could see his face a little clearer. He was of Indian descent, with a beard and hoodie over his head, showing some features on his face. I asked politely what he was doing, and he came towards my window but stood a bit of a gap away. In the most aggressive tone, he said, "Do you know who I am?" No. I didn't know whether it was rhetorical or not. "I have a lot of stuff going on in my house, and I don't need you here parking here watching me. You look real suspicious randomly parking here with your friends. Get the hell out of there. What the hell do you think you're doing?" I nervously chuckled to myself, trying to keep calm, but my anxiety was already halfway through the roof at this point. I didn't understand how I looked in any way threatening, as I'm a small girl who's been told I look like a kid. I was in my pajamas and clearly minding my own business. "Look, I just parked here to smoke. I come here all the time and live nearby." He got right up to my window, slid his fingers through the gap, and forced my window all the way down, screaming at the top of his lungs for me to get the hell out of here. I screamed in terror and told him to stop swearing as I had a minor in the car, and he was scaring me. I don't know why, I knew he wouldn't exactly care. He screamed and went red. "If you don't get out of here now, I'll damage you in your car." My adrenaline was already hitting peak, so I was terrified, didn't even bother putting my seatbelt on, and jolted out of there in a panic. I went straight ahead at a junction leading me to a dead end, but I took that opportunity to just calm down. My whole body was shaking with adrenaline. I couldn't even keep my foot on the clutch. My sister was quickly asking me if I was okay. Before I could even answer, I see a pair of headlights zooming towards me. It was the guy, going at least 50 miles an hour on a 20 miles per hour road. He nearly crashed into my car, but by some miracle he didn't. He jumped out the car, and this is when I realized my window was still all the way down from when he forced it down. I wanted to cry, and I quickly tried to shut my window, but he was too fast. He half threw his body into my car, through my window, and I screamed so loudly, with his ear right next to my face, I'm sure I deafened him. He was trying to steal my car keys from the ignition. I thanked my lucky stars that with my car, in order to get the car keys out, I would have had to have had my foot on the clutch, which I didn't. With one hand, I was pressing down on the horn of my car to make as much noise as possible to alert the people in their houses, and with the other, scratched his hands away from my car keys, and my poor siblings were in the car bawling their eyes out. My little brother had no idea what he could do to protect me, and my sister was in the passenger seat experiencing all of this in front of her eyes. I heard the guy enough for him to get out of my damn car. I told you to get out of here or I'll hurt you. I told you. The guy attempted to pull up my door handle trying to open it and get in, and then I noped out of there. I didn't care that my body was half shaking like a fish out of water. My main priority was now the safety of my siblings and myself. I knew that we were making a loud commotion. I held onto the horn of my car trying to get the attention from other houses, but nobody helped. It was 7 p.m. and I was certain that people would hear me screaming, but they all acted oblivious. I managed to wriggle my way out of that dead end and went to a new street, and to a totally different area and parked. I knew this probably wasn't a good idea, but I knew the guy wasn't following me. As I drove around for a good 10 minutes, I just released my emotions, and me and my sister and little brother were just sitting there in the car sobbing away. This was the first time that anything like that had ever happened to me, or any of us. I rang the police and immediately wanted to punch myself in the face when the dispatcher asked if I got his registration. Of course, in my panic, I didn't. I wanted to slap myself in the face because I listened to these horror stories on YouTube all the time, and always felt they taught me how to handle certain situations, and I couldn't even bloody get a registration number. The dispatcher was amazingly empathetic, as was the female officer who called me the next day. As a woman, she understood how scary that must have been for me, and again I cried to her. Unfortunately, the cops informed me there were no CCTV cameras where it happened, so they couldn't really do much, especially with me not knowing where he came from, if he came from a house, and if so, which one, or his registration number. The female officer apologized to me, but it really was my fault for not mentally noting important information. They made a report of my attack, so if anything similar happened in the area, they can connect them. The officer said I most likely parked there, and he was doing something illegal and freaked out on me. I just think he was a freak who enjoyed scaring people who looked like easy prey. So to the creep who tried to steal my car, let's not meet again. I got my first job when I was 16 at a Taco Bell, about a 7-minute drive from my house. It was a step up from a McDonald's, and close enough that if I didn't have a ride, I could tough it out and walk or get an Uber, because it would be cheap. I made all my friends working there. I was really shy in high school, and didn't talk to anyone, but work was a second home. I felt more comfortable, less judged, and opened up into a new person after working there for a short time. After a few months, our general manager leaves after being hired elsewhere, and we get a new one, Dan, who had been working at another store. He was arrested and had been in prison for a while, and got out and still had his manager's keys and just came back to work. They needed a new general manager at my store, so they switched him over and promoted him. He was kind of weird, but I tried to be nice. I really liked all my co-workers, location, and loved the last GM, so I was trying to make it work with this one too. That's when I realized he was a massive weirdo. He started sleeping in his car in the parking lot overnight. He had a wife and house, was twitchy and jumpy, and had a bad leg he would constantly be limping from, and started stealing bags of tortillas and messing up the inventory. He was just obviously a tweaker. They literally hired out of prison to come run a store. Great fit. I was over it now. I missed the old general manager, and the other managers were between 18 to 21, and a bit hard to get along with. I was thinking of leaving, but was just sort of riding it out, hoping all these people would eventually be let go. Then I'm standing at front counter during a shift. I was assigned to lobby, i.e. taking people's orders, cleaning the front of the restaurant and the bathrooms, and restocking straws and stuff. I'm wiping down a fat stack of trays and just zoned out, when Dan comes up behind me. "So you're thinking of leaving?" We're all pretty much in each other's business, and everyone told each other everything they heard. So I didn't care that he knew and wasn't remotely surprised. I just said, "Yeah," and probably came up with some excuse about school. "Well, if you do that, I'm gonna have to give you a few drinks and put you in my car." "What?" I side-eyed him. "What does that mean?" I got an uncomfortable laugh and just kept on wiping. I quit that very next day.
When I was a kid, we moved into an old, small house for rent. We were dirt all that time. Right beside the house is a closed space. Like it was empty, but for some reason, it was all boarded up with scrap and plywood and you couldn't see what was inside. When we could finally afford to rent that space a year later, we found animal claws and fangs and old herbs inside. We cleaned that space in the span of a day, and my parents decided to convert it into a small church. Guitars and drum sets were donated to us by kind strangers, and my mum was pumped up to invite all the neighborhood kids the next day. But that night, while saying grace for the meal, I remember my dad praying, "God, cleanse this place from evil spirits." And we all heard a loud shriek/growl followed by a crashing noise. My mum was seated where she had a view of the door to the place. I saw her just standing at something in that direction, while Dad finished his prayer. Then we all went outside to check it out. Well, the drums were scattered on the ground like they were carried and thrown down. All the windows and doors were locked, so no wind, no animal could have done that, if even they were strong enough to push over such a heavy drum set. I remember because I triple-checked all the locks on the windows, trying to act tough around my dad. When we returned to the table for dinner, my mum said that while we were praying right after the noise, she saw a dark figure that loomed at the door, angrily pointing at her and shaking its head violently, which vanished when we said amen. I slept beside my parents that night. Do doppelgangers count as ghosts? Because my wife's friend used to tell her that she always used to see her doppelganger in their dormitory back in college. My wife says that when they do, it's always a stressful time in her life. Like she'd be in class worrying about exams, but her roommate would see her walking out of the CR in their room and then lie down. Then she's gone when her roommate tries to talk to her. One night we drove out to a friend's backyard but we were fighting. It was a point where we both wanted out, tired of constantly arguing. It was ironic, attending a wedding like that. I parked in a well-lit spot, empty seat, and walked away to catch a bit of air. I looked back and saw her outside the car, then walking in the opposite direction towards our friend's house. I looked away, pissed, then walked back to the car to drive away and leave her behind. The doors were locked. I peered inside and she wasn't there. The keys weren't there either. I started to run after her, but suddenly the car opened and she called out to me. I was confused, asking her how she did that. She said she was also puzzled why I was circling and peering inside the car as if I were looking for something. "I saw you walk away, and I wanted to get in." "Idiot, I was in the car the whole time watching you." We just sat in the car in disbelief, and she told me it must have been a doppelganger, but I don't know how that works.
This happened about 3 months ago, and it still comes up in conversation because we just genuinely don't know what happened or what was about to happen to us. It was around 7 p.m. in November, and it was dark in Metro Detroit. I was driving and my fiancée was riding shotgun. We were exiting a pretty populated highway when we turned onto a mile road near the city shopping mall and outlet centers. Being in close proximity to the mall, it was strange the boulevard was that empty at this time of night. So we're driving on the deserted westbound side of the boulevard when we noticed there was a stopped and running vehicle in the middle lane. Again, it was dark aside from the streetlights that lined the road every 80 yards or so, but their brake lights were obviously lit, and we were approaching quick. My fiancé and I were talking in the car at the time when we both kind of stopped to verbally question what we were both seeing. It was strange behavior, especially since the speed limit was 45 to 50 on this mile road, so you don't want to be stopped, especially this close to people exiting the highway. So we slowed down since we're cautious drivers. We approached and passed the vehicle in the far left lane as it was in the middle, and when we were about a car length away from it, the driver gunned it and started speeding to catch us up. We never left our left-hand lane, but at this point I was braking again because the behavior was off and we noticed their driving was so sporadic. Braking was almost instinctual, as much as it probably wasn't safe to do so. Continuing to drive down this mile road with still no traffic we can see in either direction, we noticed the driver was swerving their car between the middle lane and the left lane, as if trying to intentionally sideswipe us. Instant red flag. It wasn't like the driver was intoxicated or texting and just doing a poor job at staying in their lane. This was a driver in control of their swerving and coming dangerously close to hitting the side of my Jeep, going 45 miles an hour. Bad vibes. Before we knew it, we were blinded by a spotlight coming from the driver's window into my car via the passenger window. I have 20 tints on my Jeep windows, which usually help control the brightness of the sun most mornings and evenings. And even when the tints, this spotlight stunned us and we couldn't see anything but white. I didn't have time to check my mirrors before slamming on my brakes. Not sure I would have been able to see in my mirrors after being blinded. I remember my fiancé screaming, "What the hell?" And we opened our eyes, and the driver was yards ahead of us, speeding to get away. My fiancé dialed 911 immediately. I don't take crap, so I started racing down the road to catch him up for a license plate number. In Michigan, we have Michigan left turn lanes, and I could see the vehicle up ahead turning into one to enter the Moore Parkway, which is a huge roundabout. The roundabout speed limit is about 25 miles an hour, with frequent stop signs and intersections. My fiancé connected with dispatch on the phone as I was trying desperately to catch up to this vehicle. They were blowing red lights and stop signs in sight. Dispatch recommended we don't follow, but I kind of did anyway because I was really upset and committed to grabbing their plate number, but from a safe distance and at a safe speed. No way was I going to tail this person when I didn't know if they had a weapon or something. Long story short, this driver knew we were following them, and they were speeding through the roundabout, cutting drivers off and blowing intersections when we lost sight of them. At this point, the police said there were cops in the area that were already on their way looking for the vehicle we described, and that we should leave it to them. We weren't going to jeopardize our safety and the safety of other drivers just because I was angry. So we stopped our chase, but still crossed an intersection into another shopping center across the street when we saw the driver enter. We figured we could prowl instead of chase in case we saw them again, but we never found it out. Never found out who the driver was, what his motives were, or if the cops found him. We knew he was a male because we saw him through the driver's side window before he blinded us. White, male, dark ball cap. He drove a dark sedan. Looked like a newer Ford Fusion. It was a close run-in, and I'm not sure what would have happened if he'd have successfully crashed into us on that deserted mile road, or if his spotlight had successfully veered my car off the road. To the dude who scared the crap out of us and took away our eyesight while driving a moving vehicle, let's not meet again.
I'm not sure if my mother's house is haunted. Nothing strange ever happened there except for one time. I was woken up in the middle of the night by what I thought was my little sister. No one had said anything or touched me in any way to wake me up. There's that distinct feeling you get when you know there's someone there staring at you. You can feel their presence. Well, that is what woke me up. The presence of a little girl. It was pitch black, so I couldn't see a thing, but I could feel someone there, and it felt like it could be my little sister. But whoever was there was angry. The malevolent presence of a young girl. I asked quietly, "Maddie, what are you doing here?" I got no response, but felt that angry presence. I told myself I was imagining things, but I was paralyzed with fear by this point. It was very, very angry, and it felt pretty heavy. After a few minutes, I convinced myself that it had to be my younger sister, who was absolutely furious with me or perhaps sleepwalking, and I was working myself into a fit for no reason. Then, suddenly, I was struck in the crotch. Not too hard. I turned on the light, only to find no one was standing there, and the door was shut quite tightly. Utterly confused, I went to check on my mother and my sister. They were both sound asleep. I did not go back to sleep that night. That's the only strange thing that ever happened. I don't know if it was a ghost. It could have easily been my mind playing tricks on me, even making me believe I got punched, I suppose. But it always felt like a paranormal entity to me. When I was 13, I woke up one night to the sound of children laughing out my window. I had an 11-year-old brother who had friends next door, so I thought nothing of it. It happened a couple of nights in a row, and so I told my little brother to knock it off, or I'd go all big brother on him and noogie him or something. He gave me poker face and said he could hear them too, but I figured he was being a dork. That night I heard it again. I got up and opened the window to yell at him and his friends, and all I saw out of my window was the darkest, blackest silhouette I've ever seen. There were 4 or 5 of them, about the size of a toddler. As soon as I screamed, they vanished. Dad went outside to see if he could see anything. Of course he didn't. I heard them twice since then. The first time I bailed and slept in the living room. The second time I got balls enough to look outside again, and they were there. I went all 70s horror movie preacher and held up a Bible and screamed, "In the name of the Father and the Son, I command you to leave and never return." And they never did. I'm guessing it's because they were too busy laughing at me somewhere else. When I was a kid, a bunch of strange crap would happen, but my parents would lie as not to alert me. That didn't stop them from telling me when I was old enough, though. One particular occurrence was that almost every night, there would seem to be someone who went down to our hall and would seem to toggle with the doorknobs, as if they were locking them. But everyone in the house at this time was asleep. Another strange happening was that I heard laughing that didn't belong to anyone in the house. I asked my mum if she had one of her friends over from work, and she just replied, "Yes, but they've left now." I left it at that. In hindsight, there's no possible way anyone could have gotten out of the house in the time it took for me to hear the laugh and approach my mum. Lastly, there was a very strange event that happened to my sister that she swears by. It was outside, sunny, about 10, and she thinks to herself, Mum and Dad are going to be late to work. So she goes to wake them up, only to find a disgruntled couple saying it's the middle of the night. She goes to the window again, only to find that the day has ended and it's already night. I've heard this time loss ordeal could potentially be attributed to aliens. My uncle bought a new house a few years ago, and apparently there was an old woman who had trouble letting go. My aunt found said lady just lounging on the couch. She freaks out and demands that she leaves her house because it's theirs now. And as far as I'm aware, she did, and the spectre moved on. This happened a few years ago when I was bartending in college. I was coming home down a stretch of divided highway at 3 a.m. when I noticed a car heading towards me in the wrong lane. I doubted myself at first and thought the car was on the other side of the highway.
Sure enough, a white Ford sedan passed me at a really high speed, at least 90. It's worth noting for later that I was also driving a white Ford sedan. I was used to drunk drivers / idiots in the middle of the night, so I pulled to the side of the road to let him pass. I had a moment of clarity and thought to call the police, thinking this person could hurt themselves or someone else. The dispatcher answered after telling them which road and exit mile marker I was at, and told them they would send a car. The police station was only a few exits away, so I figured they would send somebody and I would just drive home. As I headed back onto the highway, I noticed some lights a few miles behind me. I live in a more rural part of southeastern Pennsylvania, and traffic at 3 a.m. tends to be truckers and cops. The car gained on me as I was getting close to speed, so I stayed in the right lane and waited to be passed. Instead, they flipped on their high beams, making it uncomfortable to drive, and rode my tailgate. At this point, I thought I was going to be pulled over by the police. I drove a white Ford sedan and had just called about a different white Ford sedan. So I grabbed my registration from my glove box, when suddenly the car behind me audibly slammed on the brakes and stopped in the middle of the highway. They must have shut off their car because the lights went out, and I saw what looked to be the same Ford sedan from earlier. Still, I thought it may have been a police car, as they had a roof rack, and it could have looked like I had reached for my gun in my glove box or something. I panicked and called 911 for a second time and asked the dispatcher if they had sent a cruiser to investigate. The dispatcher was a little curt with me and assured me that they had sent someone. "Sir, we've sent a trooper out to find the car." "Okay, I only ask because someone is following me and acting super weird. It could be a cop, and I think I freaked them out by getting my registration." "Are you getting pulled over?" "No, they didn't turn on their lights." "Let me try to get the trooper we sent out." As she was talking again, the car sped up towards me and stopped inches from my bumper. Again, their high beams were on me again and they slammed their brakes. I told the dispatcher, "I'm pretty sure it's not the police behind me." The car sped to my bumper again and turned their high beams on, this time laying on the horn. Hearing this, the dispatcher asked me what was happening. "What's going on?" "Did you honk me?" "No, that's the car behind me again." "I don't think it's a cop." "I'll try to get the trooper again, but I don't think that is him behind you." For some reason, this is what shook me. Before that, I was thinking I was getting pulled over and maybe a ticket. Up until then, I was going at the speed limit and trying to avoid getting pulled over. I told the dispatcher, "I don't care if I'm getting pulled over. I'm speeding, and if they put their lights on, then I'll pull over." I started to accelerate, and the person behind me kept up with me. The speed limit was 55, and they kept on my bumper the entire time. But this time they were swerving. I tried to signal for an exit and bail out, and they followed. At the next exit, I took the off-ramp and continued onto the on-ramp, and the car behind me followed the whole time. I thought I was about to go to Wawa, a convenience store / gas station that's pretty much the only populated place in southeastern Pennsylvania at 3 a.m. But the dispatcher thought it would be unsafe. She was calm and talking to another person, trying to send the police to me. The other person, maybe a supervisor, asked if I could drive to the police station. Realizing that I was one exit away, I told her I was going there, and said that she would have the troopers meet me outside. As I pulled off the exit, the car followed me. I blew a few red lights trying to get to the police station, and the car tried to pull into the other lane to pass me or pull up alongside me. Once the police station was in view, I put on my turn signal and the car slammed on its brakes again, turned off their lights and turned into the parking lot. The story kind of ends anticlimactically, as I pulled into the police station and met the troopers. 2 of them went out to find the car and I stayed with the 3rd. I thanked the dispatcher and her supervisor, and the straight trooper escorted me home after taking a statement from me. I was never called to follow or testify, so I can only assume the person didn't get caught.
Watch your mouth, kid, or you'll find yourself.
Every weekday, I would wake up early at around 5 a.m. for a morning workout, then head to my job. Generally, I would leave my house around 5:30 because my morning drive took about 25 to 30 minutes, giving me enough time for 2 hours before I needed to leave before my shift started. Most of my drive was just me putting loud music on, trying not to fall asleep, and it being a freeway before 6, almost everyone was going at least 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. I'll drive most of the time on a main interstate before turning off onto a smaller highway, which I would only use for a mile or so. This highway was 3 lanes on each side. People also drive fast on here, but usually not more than 75 miles an hour or so. And while you get some unsafe drivers in the morning, most people aren't swerving erratically. The highway runs north to south. An on-ramp from a main street becomes a lane. Then there are 2 entrances from the freeway. I would take that every day. One from the eastbound side and one from the westbound side. I hope that makes sense. But basically, I got on from the eastbound side, right as 3 cars from the westbound side are entering. One was sort of a orangey sports car, and the other 2 were identical grey sedans. I don't remember exactly what make or model they were, but I remember them being fairly uncommon. Not a sedan you see plenty of times a day. The orange car was sandwiched in between the 2. These guys were going at least 80. The orange car would change lanes, and the car in front would cut him off, while the other behind would change lanes to remain behind. They kept this up the entire time I was on the highway near them, weaving in and out of cars, not slowing down before I pulled off at my exit. This could be a complete coincidence and some horrible drivers, but I definitely got the vibe that the driver of the orange car was trying to get away from the grey ones. Maybe it was extreme road rage, or maybe something more sinister. Regardless, grey car drivers, let's not meet.
When I was 7 or 8, I was visiting at my mum's house for the summer. My stepsister was around 11, and I shared a room with her. To set the scene a bit, we had 2 doors into our room, one that leaned into the doorway of its hinges to a hallway, and the other was so low it had to be dug into the ground. We each had a twin bed with a window between us, a vanity near the scraping door, and a closet to the right of the leaning door. I had been asleep for a bit when my stepsister wakes me up calling my name, telling me to get over to her bed. I grudgingly get to her bed, and she says she saw a black figure at the foot of my bed. I didn't see anything, but after a bit of looking and hiding under the blanket, we look over to the vanity, where we had placed a set of glowing stars in the shape of a smiley face. It went from all glowing to exactly half glowing. It was as though something had stepped in front of the stars, and it felt like forever, though I'm sure it was only a minute or 2 until it started to glow fully once again. We knew no one had entered our room, as neither doors had moved. We are both now screaming for my brother that we think is home, and his room is down the hall, but he wasn't in. At this point, my stepsister is feeling faint by being under that blanket for so long and screaming. She tells me I have to go across the room and turn on the light, as she's too weak to do it. I somehow got the nerve to leap from the bed and run across the room to the light switch, knowing she wasn't going to no matter what. None but the 2 of us were in that room. After I sat down and stepsister had calmed some, our door opened to my brother, asking us what happened, as he was with friends under our window. We slept with the lights on for a good month after that. Another is there are 3 ghosts where I work. Very few say they've seen them, but us long-time workers know about the angry woman, the little boy and the old man in front. Well, I was walking by a table once, when I felt someone grab my shirt, but loosen their grip as I took a step. I turned to see what the person needed, but no one was there. Looking around, the closest person was 15 feet away and behind a table. I know, it was one of them.
An ally has been slain.
I was at my grandma's house in Mexico. There's a demon my mum calls La Anima, which translates to a soul. The thing has been haunting my mum's family since they were small kids, and they said the house was built on an old graveyard from the early 1900s. As a kid, lots of things happened that traumatized me,
An enemy has been
but the one thing that has stuck with me is a nightmare I had about her. I dreamt I was walking in my grandma's house and no one was home. Even though I knew no one was home, I felt as though someone was watching me. As I get to the backyard, I see La Anima, who's dressed in all black. But as I approach her, I can see her face. She has yellow eyes that sink into blackness, a thin, narrow, pale nose, and her mouth was something else. Her teeth were razor sharp and her gums were bleeding. As she came closer, I knelt down and started praying with a rosary in hand. She starts to cackle, and it gets louder and louder, and at this point in my dream, I know I'm dreaming, and I try to focus on praying, but I can't. She finally reaches me, kneels down in front of me, and continues to laugh. I stop praying. I look up at her, and she straight up says, "That's not going to help." I continued laughing. I looked down at the rosary. It was gone. So was she. Fast forward to a few years later. My uncle and I were talking about La Anima. He started talking about a nightmare he had. As he's talking, I realized we both had the same nightmare. It's crazy, but I never told anyone about it. I have an identical twin sister and have experienced some strange stuff. Once, when she was flying from New Zealand to California, about an hour into the flight, she experienced the worst turbulence of her life. Food was flying everywhere. Passengers were scared, and the pilot even came on to say that he'd never encountered anything like it in his 20 years of flying. Now, as you can imagine, my sister was pretty freaked out and scared, especially since she had a long way to go before the flight was over. But fortunately, it only lasted about 10 minutes. I was on the East Coast at the time and woke up in the middle of the night out of a dead sleep feeling terribly frightened. I was so anxious that I just sat in my bed and just knew that something was wrong with my sister. I remember looking at the clock and wondering what would wake me. It was about 3 a.m. I felt hopeless, and interestingly enough, kind of nauseous. After 10 minutes, the feeling faded. I felt that my sis was fine and resumed sleep. Hours later, once her flight had landed, she called me to let me know that she was back in the States. I asked her how the flight was and asked if she had any turbulence. And she was like, "Yes, it was terrible. Food was flying, the attendants had to buckle up. Everyone was just waiting to fall out the sky." I asked her what time it happened, and after doing the math with time zones, it was when I woke up to that feeling of being scared and sick. She told me that the plane was hitting bad turbulence. They tried going down in altitude, which made her stomach queasy. Lots of stuff like that happened with us, but that was the first time something woke me up in the middle of the night. Twin connections are strange.
I was about 8 months pregnant, and my great-grandfather, who had raised me as his own, had just passed a week prior. I was having a hard time accepting that reality. One day I'm sitting at my kitchen table that faces down a long hallway into a bedroom, and I'm home alone. I glance up from my food, and down the hallway, standing in the hall, is a tall, skinny figure roughly my grandfather's build. I had to do a double take, because I couldn't believe what I had seen. I felt this overwhelming calmness come over me, and a peace I hadn't known since before my grandfather had passed. I get chills remembering it, but I knew it was my grandfather coming back to tell me it was okay to be sad, but that I needed to move on, because he was happy, and wanted me to be happy as well. I know he wanted me to know that, because the feeling coupled with the thoughts I'm happy, why aren't you, popped right into my head. I've had several encounters with spirits since, and that was the time that I really accepted I have gifts I've been ignoring my entire life up until that point, and it helped me accept them. There was another time when I was babysitting my nephew, just him. I was alone, laying on the couch watching a movie which faced directly into the kitchen doorway, where said hallway and room were directly off, and my nephew stops and goes, "Who is that?" I thought he meant on TV, and I told him the character, but he says, "No, who's the guy in the kitchen doorway?" And me at this point in my life was still very much in denial, and stared directly at the TV, refusing to look over, and said, "It's no one, don't worry." I tell him, "You leave him alone, and he will." And he did. And he says, "Okay, he's gone now." He said sorry. My nephew was 7. I'm pretty sure it's my gift and that it's running in the family. My daughter is also extremely sensitive to spirits and such. She's 9. That's a part of my life I hadn't talked with her about yet, so that she can organically come to me with it. And I was shaken.
An enemy has been slain. An ally has been slain.
I've never experienced anything paranormal myself, but my family has plenty of stories to share. This one took place sometime during the mid-1950s. My grandma came from a very poor family in Mexico. Her house was more like a shack, with a dirt floor. Every morning my great-grandmother would send her 2 eldest daughters, my grandma is the 3rd born, to go to the woods to collect water from the river to bring back so the family could use it for washing, drinking, or cooking. The 2nd sister didn't tag along this particular morning, so it was up to the eldest sister to do the honor. The walk to the river was about 2 miles or so. She gets there and sees a long, black-haired girl playing with a stick, tapping it against the flowing water. The girl had her back to my grandma's sister. She didn't see too many people come to the area, so she tried striking up a conversation with the girl. The girl didn't answer her, or even turn her back to acknowledge her. My grandma's sister shrugs it off and approaches the river to collect the water. When she got closer, the girl turns away slowly to face my grandma's sister. And my grandma's sister immediately sees that the girl has no face, just skin replacing the eyes, the nose and lips. She didn't really have a chin either, it was sort of just rounded off. Immediately my grandma's sister dropped the bucket and fled the scene, running the whole 2 miles, and she refused to ever do that chore again.
Being from a 3rd world country, you see a lot of stuff happening all over. You never think it's going to happen to you. After all, you're careful and you know better. You mind your own business, and everything's going to go 5 by 5. My mom is one of the strongest women I know. She's one of 15 siblings, which I think toughened her up and made her a woman of strong morals and no nonsense. She's one of the eldest of her siblings, so she has that nurturing mama bear thing down. She'll take crap from no one, and when confronted with fight or flight, she'll fight every single time. Like the one time my mum was picking up my sister from kindergarten, and some guy tried to snatch her purse. She took notice of him walking towards her with no good intentions, and she told my sister to hold onto her skirt. And when the man made his move, she just pressed her thumbs into the man's eyes and scratched him wherever she could reach. She's gotten mellow later in life, but for me, she's still the epitome of love and strength. This is the story of how I almost lost my mum to road rage. I was 10, it was a Sunday, and I had gone to the swimming pool with my friends. My dad was supposed to pick me up at 5, but by 7 I was fuming, angry, and decided to walk home, as it was probably a 20-minute walk. I got home and was mad, and my sisters were scolding me because it was dark and dangerous for a 10-year-old to be walking home on his own, and my dad had gone to pick me up 5 minutes ago. But I didn't care. I was pissed, and just walked into my parents' room to give my mum a piece of my mind, when I found her sobbing and in distress. I asked her what was going on, and she was angry at my dad and didn't want to talk to him again. My anger faded, and curiosity striked instead. So I asked her. Turns out around 4:30 when my dad was going to pick me up, he was coming back from his farm and subdued cut off my dad, who unfortunately has some road rage, honked his horn, pulled down the window at my mum's side, and yelled a branch of obscenities. The dude in the other car lowered his window, pulled out a gun, and began shooting at my dad's car. Dad hit the brakes, and let the other car pull further away. They stopped and got out the car to catch their breath, and that's when my mum saw a hole in the space between the passenger's front door and the passenger's back door. A bullet nearly missed my mum's head, and she was hysterical. They got home and Mum broke down and cried. Dad had to calm her down. That's why they were late to collect me. It's probably not as scary as other stories, but it's been 20 years since that day. And every once in a while I'll think to myself, if there had been a few centimeters in difference, my mum could be dead. And the what if is what scares me every time.
I used to live in an old house in rural Wyoming. My mum and I had a couple of shows we would watch together every week. We were sitting on the couch that faced the wall with the TV on it. To the right were a couple of windows and a couch that was empty. Simultaneously, we both jerked our heads to look at the window. The drapes that covered the window had been stuck on the couch, and in one swift motion, they were pulled back to straight and almost took the whole wall. We were both very uninterested in ghosts and far from believers, but after years, we still try and come up with a rational explanation other than paranormal, and have yet to be successful in our endeavor.
I served in the Oregon-Eugene mission in the US from October 2015 to October 2017. My first area was on the coast in Bandon, a town where some Native Americans massacred some settlers, not to mention the town burning down. My mission companion, Jake, and I lived in a home that the church rented for us that was right next to the docks. In our study room, we had a sliding glass door that led to the backyard. On that same outside wall was the window that led to the garage. In the garage below that window was our washer and dryer. If you were in either the study with the sliding door or in the garage alone at night, you would hear someone knock 2 or 3 times quite fast. But when you would go to check, no one would be there. Many times one of us would be reading my scriptures and planning some lesson details, while the other was in the bathroom or kitchen. The tapping would happen, and the person who wasn't in the room would come in and ask if it was what we dubbed the glass tapper. When I got my new companion, Mike, about 6 weeks into my mission, I started hearing some weird things in the abandoned house, other than the glass tapper. We would come home to hear someone running around our apartment and oftentimes see our fridge shake for no reason, as if one peg were too short. One day, I had it and looked at the fridge and yelled, "Stop it!" which actually seemed to work. My original companion Jake in this same house in Bandon were laying down in my bedroom. My missionary companion was in his bed on the opposite wall of the room. My back was to him, and we were just talking about what we did before our mission, girls and whatnot. My companion got up to use the bathroom, and once he shut the door I heard someone crawl into his bed, as if they pulled the cover over themselves. I knew it wasn't him because I could hear him peeing. I didn't turn over to look and see, because I was shocked. And yes, I told him after he crawled into bed again, because I didn't know how to bring it up. About 6 months into my mission, I was in Roseburg, Oregon. I started to have dreams. I wouldn't exactly call them nightmares like of demons, like the supernatural ones with black eyes, but they had smiles like the cartoon Grinch that were really long and curly. They would tell me I was no good and going to hell, and would put my arm into the square and cast them away, but they never left. They usually just shut up and stared at me. I started to wear my mission tag that's commonly associated with Mormon missionaries to bed, and that completely solved the dream problem. But sometimes I would just be laying there, and feel the end of my bed shake. Not violently, but enough to wake me up, and just to let me know they were still there. It still happens sometimes. No nightmares, but the shaking still happens. I don't know how to tell that part to my wife. In Roseburg, Oregon, my companions and I were teaching a family once. They eventually told us that their baby girls, who were 2 on 1, would wake up in the night and point to a particular corner of the room as they screamed. They also had an old railroad lantern that got so hot the glass shattered. They asked us to perform an exorcism on the home. We told them that we would bless the house, and they asked me to act as a voice for them. As I was praying, I felt as if there was someone standing so close to me that the face was only an inch away. You know the feeling when someone is getting close to your face when your eyes are closed. How can you sense it? It was like that, but hot, like an oven. These are my experiences, and I don't know how to explain them away. In the first year we moved to our new house, our nanny said that someone was copying my older sister. She said that she saw my older sister sitting by her bed, but that my sister was still in school, so it was a bit kind of creepy. Here's my experience, though. I saw my younger sister walk into our parents' room, and I assumed that she was going in there to use their bathroom. And me being the funny one in the family decided that I would scare her. So I walked stealthily and got inside the bathroom, then screamed so that she would be frightened. But no one was there. The second time that I saw my younger sister's doppelganger was when I was on my phone minding my own business, when all of a sudden in the corner of my eye, I saw the head of my younger sister pop out behind my bedroom door to see what I was doing. Of course, I ignored her, thinking that she was just being silly, but she did it again. Her head popped out behind the door, and I got annoyed, so I chased after her and thought that she went to my parents' room, but of course, no one was there. She had been downstairs the whole time, and I would have heard her go down the stairs. When I was 6 years old, we lived in the center of the set of 3 very similar houses. I remember ours was purple, the one to the left was blue, and the one to the right was yellow. I recently had bought one of those big inflatable bouncy balls from Walmart and had no one to play with me, so I played with it in the backyard by myself. After school one day, I accidentally hit the purple ball to the yellow house side of the fence. I was going to ask my mom what to do, but a kid on the other side hit it back over to me. Thinking we could play, I hit it back over and he returned it. It became a daily thing, and I would just hit the ball back and forth with him until I got bored after school. The kid wouldn't respond to any questions I had, so I assumed he was just shy. At one point I hit it over and he didn't return it, so I asked my mum if I could climb the fence and go get it. She was never outside with me, so she always thought I was playing alone, I guess. We only got the house because my mum was friends with the landlord, and the houses were recently built. She told me that no one had ever lived there, and that they were trying to sell it. We moved not long after, but I still have no idea who was returning that ball to me.
I was in student housing at the time. I had a double room to myself and a shared apartment. Being wary of people coming into my room, I had set up a PS3 camera as a motion-activated security cam that recorded to my PC when it detected movement. I get home one night after school and see that it had been triggered, so I scout the room, checked cabinets, bathrooms, closets, etc. The closet door itself was difficult to open and close because it had dropped, and so you had to lift it to move it, so I forced it back closed. I sit and watch the video to see the camera was triggered by the closet door opening by itself. I stayed at my then girlfriend's room for about a week after that.
Ally has been slain.
My mum was dating my dad at the time. I was around 10. He lived with his parents since his dad was sick, and since it wasn't really that far from our house, we thought we'd go visit him there. We had dinner and stayed for a while. He gave us gifts, gave me a cow plushie, which I still have to this day, and everything goes well. Then it gets late, around 11 p.m., and we decide to leave. It's literally pitch black. Also, I may remind you that it's probably mid-December. There's no snow falling at the moment, so it's icy and you couldn't see your hands in front of your face. So like any normal human beings would, my mum puts her high beams on. Something I forgot to add to this is that she would usually shut them off when she'd get close to the other cars, and it's not like she was blinding them. She only had them on when she was very far away. You'll understand why I said this in a minute. We get behind this black car in which the driver is acting like a jerk and won't drive normally. They're speeding up to almost 70 and then slowing down to an almost stop. And my mum can't turn because the road we're on is rural and there's nothing but cow fields on either side. There was nowhere to go, so we ended up behind him with an extremely aggravated driver behind us. It's a bit harder to see again, so my mum puts on her high beams, a fair distance away from the car in front. Because you wouldn't do that if you weren't far away. But of course the driver in front of us stops, completely. And then this huge, burly, bigger-built man starts sprinting over to our car at top speed. I start screaming and crying and can see that he's holding a blunt object in his hand. My mum recoils as she fears the worst as she looks around, trying to figure out how she could escape. There's a car coming from the other way, so she can't turn around. His car is in front of us, so she can't hit the gas. There's only fenced-off fields around us, and he pounds on the window like the FBI and starts screaming and swearing. He starts threatening us, saying that he'd kill my mum if he ever caught her with our high beams on again. Of course I'm screaming and crying, and being a small, skinny 10-year-old girl not knowing if me and my mum were about to get killed, and also knowing full well if she did, I wouldn't know what to do or how to get home, and I didn't have my dad's phone number memorized at the time, and I didn't exactly remember how to work my mum's phone, so I didn't even know how to call my dad to begin with. The man's body language was just off. I'm not sure if he was drunk or high, but it seemed that way. And he looked at me for a second, which scared me and my mum rightfully. My mum is also a very small lady, and our car wasn't very fast, so she wasn't sure what to do because neither fight or flight would work at this point. The blunt object in his hand turned out to be a huge flashlight, which he began to repeatedly hit the window with. He also started flashing the light in my mum's face to blind her. Ironic. My mum yelled at him to get lost as he hit the window harder, about to break it. Thankfully, the car behind us started to lay on the horn, and he got back into his car out of fear and sped off. My mum called out to my dad, who drove around almost all night to look for the guy but didn't find anything. I can't remember if we called the cops or not. I just remember crying into my pillow all night long.
A little backstory. I was around 11 years old when my grandmother passed away. My parents both worked early in the morning, and she was the one who usually put my brother and I on the bus. We lived in the country, and so the bus came to our houses. I don't know why my brother wasn't home with me this particular morning, but I was getting on the bus myself. Anyway, I had gotten up and dressed and everything by myself with no problems and nothing weird. We lived in a 2-story farmhouse that was over a century old, and creaking sounds in the house were nothing out of the ordinary. But when I went downstairs, it felt different. I heard what sounded like heavy footsteps walking up and down the hallway stairs. I was trying to watch for the bus and figure out who else was home, when suddenly the footsteps started at the far end of the house and ran down the hall all the way to the stairwell, where a male voice called my name. It was familiar, but not anyone in my family. So I went to the foot of the stairs and walked about halfway up and turned to look at the top of the stairs, afraid of what I would see. And there was no one there. but the sound of footsteps running back up the hall and the feeling that someone had just been standing there was enough for me to run outside and wait for the bus out there. I have plenty of other stories growing up in a mildly haunted house, but this was the only time that it ever spoke to me. The grandmother I referenced previously got a kitten when I was young, probably 5 or so. She was white with bright blue eyes and a black spot at the base of her tail. They called her Princess, and I loved her. After both my grandparents had passed away, as my grandpa passed less than 2 years after my grandmother, we took care of her. We didn't move her out of their house because we were going to move in, and we were working on going through what was left in the house before. It didn't make sense to move her if we were still going to be there every day. Fast forward to moving day, the night before my first day of school in 7th grade. My parents, brother and I all grabbed our pillows and blankets and went down the road to our new house to officially move in. I was the first one through the door and was uncomfortably greeted by the sight of Princess laying dead on the floor. It appeared that she had a heart attack mid-stride, and she landed perfectly on a small decorative pillow that, according to my mum, hadn't been there when she had been in the house earlier that afternoon. I was traumatized. I hadn't fully grieved for my grandparents, and now their cat, who I saw as a physical connection to them, was gone too. It was rough.
Double kill.
Fast forward several years and I'm 16 now.
Slain.
My family didn't get another cat. My dad didn't like them, and we had 4 dogs at the time. I'm laying in bed one night trying to fall asleep, and I feel the daintiest footsteps on my bed. You must understand that I've slept with my bedroom door closed for my entire life, and the footsteps were too light to be any of our dogs, but they started by my feet and walked up next to my legs, and finally I felt what seemed to be a cat curled up and laying down right at my stomach. I didn't want to move because I didn't know what was going on, but after a while the weight seemed to just lift away. I didn't feel movement, it just got lighter, and when I looked down nothing was there. But I know that it was Princess coming to cuddle for a little while. That is the one and only time I've experienced anything like that, and I've never heard of anyone else having a similar experience.
I'm 30 years old now, but want to share with you a true story that my dad told me when I was around 10, and has stuck with me till this day. I am originally from Romania. I want you to know where I'm from because a lot of you probably haven't have heard of it, or if you do, know it from Dracula. One thing you need to know in order to understand the impact that the story had on me was that we are a country where the majority have a strong belief in God and evil, angels and demons. My dad is, well, something similar to a Catholic. He sings in church. He's not a priest. Back home we have a priest and a singer. That's called a daskal, and they do every church together, like the Sunday prayers, the baptisms, the weddings. Anyway, one summer night they went to do the ceremony for someone who passed away. They were all there singing, when all of a sudden it started to get really cold inside the room. They could even see their breath forming in front of them, despite the fact it was the middle of summer. My father and the priest look at each other, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't want to say anything to the family, because they didn't want to scare them, so they continued. A few minutes later, my dad started to lose his voice. He was opening his mouth, trying to sing, but the words didn't come out. And all of a sudden, they heard a big bang just over their heads in the attic, and the ceiling started to get red, and the fluid began dripping. That was something they couldn't ignore. They went to see what happened, and when they hit the attic, they saw a big glass barrel that was full with red wine had exploded out the blue. They went downstairs, finished the ceremony, and then went home. On his way home, my dad had to walk by the cemetery. He had done that for many years. It was a normal thing for him to do, not remotely frightening. But after what had happened that night, he felt something was wrong. It was about 11, and just him on the road after he passed the cemetery. And then suddenly he couldn't shake the feeling like something was following him. He was kind of shocked after what happened, and too scared to turn around. The feeling engulfed him. It was as if it were getting closer, feeling its breath on his neck, and his hair stood on end. All of his senses told him not to turn around, which he did, and he just went home in a straight line. When he got home, my mum was waiting for him on the porch. He entered the front garden, locked the gate behind him, and when he reached my mother, she asked him, "Who's the man behind you?" She said there was a tall man behind him. The next morning, when they wake up, they found the front gates open. My dad always said to me that the devil always tries to scare you and get the ones with a strong belief in God. If they don't try and scare you, it's because they don't need to, because you've already turned away from him, according to my dad. This happened a few months ago. I'm a 23-year-old female, and I finally bought a car for myself. I love driving around and listening to music alone or with my siblings. This very night it was around 7 p.m, winter time, and I took my two siblings, 18-year-old female and 13-year-old male, out for a drive after their consistent pleading because they were bored. Now I'm a smoker, and coming from a South Asian household, women aren't meant to smoke, so I took the opportunity to smoke without worrying that my parents could catch me. The city I live in has a good side and a bad side, and I lived in a very good side, or so I thought. Quiet, suburban area. I didn't hesitate to park somewhere, get out and smoke for a while leaning against my car, as I don't like smoking in my own car, and strolling away on my phone. I parked underneath a lamppost and got out and lit my cig, and all was well. It was dark, but I wasn't scared as I visited that road regularly, and it wasn't too far from my aunt's house. As I lit up, I looked up from my phone and looked around to see a man walk out of the shadows from a bush. I didn't think anything of it. I see people going for walks all the time around here. He was at least 6'4", was on the opposite sidewalk, and I assumed he was just going to carry on walking, so I carried on looking at my phone, until I look up to see him just standing there, fully facing me and watching me. My sister in the car must have been watching him too, and knocked on the window, telling me to come in. I had already butted out my cigarette, and was making my way to my car door, keys in hand, and the guy was still standing there completely still. I got in anyway, locked my door, and breathed a sigh of relief, thinking perhaps I was just overreacting. I put my key in the ignition, and I turned to see where the guy was, and I see that he's now behind my car.
Water.
Why is everybody leaving? Now I only have to wait for 2 other people.
Stress I've been through.
Okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that. Alright, Pepperoni and Timmy, can you guys get against the back of the ship doors over here so we can interview you real quick? I can see you. Or Pepperoni, please go to the back of the doors. Dirty Dan, you're not one of these new recruits. You're a leader. Come with me.
I really don't give a fuck
I'm
anymore.
not. That's good. You are second in command. You are the boss of the ship. Besides me, tell these little maggots to get to the back of doors. Timmy, get to the back of the doors right now.
Me, Timmy.
So like I'm sitting there like barbecue sauce on my nippy.
Oh no.
Yo.
You are dirty. I can just sense it. You need to take a shower.
No. That good?
Oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Oh yeah, now it's a vape crew.
No, it's DMT. Fuck vape, DMT, yes.
Oh, DMT, oh, you fought playing this title. I can Stormy, so
I'm
I guess
looking
not
for
gonna-
the hose.
Oh, the hose? They're not looking for you.
Okay, I'm leaving then, cause I guess they're not here, bro.
Yeah, they're not looking for you. You're not gonna get any.
They're not looking for you, bro. You scared them away, fuck.
Oh, I got them. They're with me.
No,
You?
no,
With that
yeah,
voice? Oh, good.
No.
Good luck.
Hey, bro, guess what? You get no pussy, you get no hoe, okay?
You don't even. You like ass.
Yeah,
Guy ass.
you get nothing, bro, okay?
Good thing I'm not your bro, huh? Okay.
You get no hoe, you get no pee, alright?
That's you.
Right to my life. Scaring all the hoes away, oh, actually, yeah, weird.
Was that you?
You little weirdo,
howdy.
you little weirdo.
Looking for hose on Lethal Company. He's already fucked. Razi the Lost. What I do? Oh, thanks. What up, Dantes?
Alive, breathing.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's always good. And I like the live and breathing part.
Yeah.
You ready?
Yeah.
This is the party. This is jam.
What's
Call
going
me
on?
your Uncle Sam. What's up, guy?
Hey
Significant.
man, what's going on?
Not much. We just racking some bills.
Hell yeah, man. That's cool.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's doable.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yep.
Yeah.
It's already done.
Dude.
It's already done.
Oh, oh shit. Okay.
Yeah,
I
we're
joined
just
the
collecting.
lobby a second ago.
Yeah.
They had it was 3,500 and they had like 500 on the ship or something.
Oh no.
And they had 2 days left.
Oh no.
And fucking some idiot got struck by lightning on Titan immediately because he had to shovel up the staircase.
Oh, what
The other person got killed by a coal head, and I don't know. The other person got killed by a mask or something.
It's not meant to last anyway. And you're like, yeah.
No. And I brought on 700 onto the ship, and they canned the lobby. I'm like, what the fuck am I supposed to do?
What the hell?
I know, it's just like, what the fuck? That's not doable.
Alright, well, we were going to Titan on Stormy, but I changed it. It's now dying.
Fine.
Just because
but I'll do it.
yeah, people keep saying they can do Stormy and then they go out and die, so I'm like, okay.
Yeah, immediately, I know. I had the weirdest modder of the game before.
And what was
Dude
that?
Dude was acting like he didn't have any mods or anything, and he was just like
yeah.
playing it off. And it wasn't
Yeah,
like he was
God
doing
mode.
anything malicious or anything. No,
Usually
maybe, I
you
don't
have-
know. He only died twice in our like 12 runs we did.
Okay.
And that's not the thing that was like, oh yeah, he's definitely modding. He kept mentioning that we were dead even before we could communicate to him or before he saw our bodies. It's like, how the hell you know?
Oh yeah, because he has a mini map.
Mm-hmm. Kept mentioning monsters that nobody saw except he could see.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, dude, come on.
Just come on.
He didn't know how the ghost scroll worked, even at his high
What the
level.
hell? He's all
Exactly.
modding.
Mm-hmm. I died to the ghost scroll. He got ghost scroll, and he's like, "How'd you die, Sig? How'd you die?" And I'm like, "Gee, buddy, I wonder." It's like, motherfucker.
Oh man, yeah, we gotta live, but more loot the merrier. We
Wild.
can secure this next one in the bag.
Yeah, I'm gonna search bottom down here first.
Alright.
In the buddy system? Hell yeah. Oh. Toy cube. The store's cleared.
Alright, the bottom floor is clear.
All of it?
There's only two doors. You guys went one, I went the other.
Alright. Yeah, I'll go with you. Bring Timmy. Stairs. That's dead end. Hey, the other way's a dead end down here.
Alright.
It's the only way to go.
That one I did not know.
Okay.
I cleared this one. This has a turret in there, so that's why I'm warning you.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of ways to go over here.
Alright, coming.
It's a big, maybe it's smaller than it appears, but it looks a lot bigger on entry. Yeah. Hey, watch out, there's a land.
Landmines, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I thought
They
he
did it,
was
no.
coming behind. Okay.
Oh, at least a snare flea just dropped behind me, but he did not get me right at the moment.
Yeah, yeah, I'm trying to see if I can see him.
Oh, Thumper. Oh, this is bad. Thumper, Thumper behind me.
He's coming for me. Oh, not good. He just fucked off, I guess. Watch out, watch out. The Thumper's coming. Run me! Are you still alive, man? I'm just gonna try and run. I'll see what's back here. He keeps disabling current.
shit, I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead. Oh shit.
There's no way. Have I been muted this entire time?
Oh, I'm definitely dead
Yeah,
now.
I thought you were just quiet.
Oh my god, bro. That's my
Didn't hear
bad.
a word you said.
I've been fucking muted this
Yeah,
entire time, bro. And I was talking to you guys this entire time.
I thought you was just mute.
Yeah,
I
you
thought
Oh
you
my
was
definitely
just
god,
I
dude.
thought you were
No,
mute too.
no, everyone like said things that just like
Maybe you
made
folks
sense.
prefer
I
Italy.
didn't even think about it until now, and I was like, wait a minute.
They're like, yeah, they must be responding to me.
Nobody said a word. I was like, fuck. I thought everybody could hear me. I thought you could hear me
No.
because you responded when I was like, that guy was fucking weird. And you're like, yeah, dude, that guy was fucking weird. And I was like,
Oh shit.
you
That's
just
just
said
me
things and they
timing.
were like responses to what I said.
Man, that's rough. Thumper really fucked us up there.
Yeah, man, I ran downstairs and I got fucking caught.
I know.
Yeah, you
I
had
saw
your
you
mic
pulled
when
the
you jumped
flashbang.
in, but then yeah, I didn't hear you for a while. Did I explain flashing?
No, I saw it downstairs. Yeah, Thumper fucking squad wiped us, dude.
He did.
My
squad
bad,
wipe us.
boys. All right.
Turned, picked up the
I
rest
tried
of me.
to kill him, but
Yeah.
I was really just evading, and then I died.
Is his mic muted too? Because I haven't heard him talk either.
I've talked plenty.
You
What
got
are
one,
talking
Rozzy.
about?
What are
What
you
about?
talking about?
Okay.
What are you talking about?
No.
I'm gonna go piss yellow.
I cannot believe I spent
Oh damn!
fucking the last 15 minutes.
One more day. We didn't get nothing, but we're still 1,000 over our quota, so let's try to get
Okay.
a
Oh,
full
okay. Alright, that's good.
moons.
We're just gonna have to make up for what we didn't get.
Alright, yeah, exactly. Dying is good again, so.
Even though
do that.
we're over.
Oh yeah, because it's gonna be for the next one. If we don't get extra shit, we
Mhm.
might not make the
Oh
next
yeah,
one. I think
exactly.
we got it though.
We hopefully.
Yeah, at least we can go back to
Easy
Titan
money,
hopefully
boys.
next time.
Hell yeah.
Alright, start if you're ready.
I'm just gonna do what I do, what I do.
Sebastian, I'm reading 2-star greens. Fuck.
Man, I thought you just were like just quiet. I'm like, alright, that's fine. It doesn't matter.
Nah, that makes sense, bro. That would make sense
Yeah,
why I got
tell you
kicked
what,
from the
it
last
makes
few.
it quiet.
Hey, down here's clear, buddy.
Okay.
I can hear you now.
Yeah, no shit. Amen. You clearing in here, yeah?
Yeah, it's clear. I'll just double check just to be safe. Yeah, nothing.
Copy.
I just thought it was a little strange to say we didn't find
Oh,
much
there's a
yet.
fucking turd on the stairs.
Oh, that's bullshit.
I don't know how he didn't die.
This guy in the terminal? Could you deactivate it, please?
I don't think so.
Oh, it should be on the map. And then you get over there? Yeah, alright. That door's clear.
That left way is clear.
Fire. Hey, fire exit's over here. We could take things through fire exit. key.
I need a key over here.
I don't have one. Hey, fire exit's pretty close to where we're at right now. We could just take things to fire exit and not have to worry about the turret since everything's upstairs anyway.
Sounds Gucci.
Oh yeah, man.
Come on, you can get up there. I believe in you. Which one of these teleports me in?
Go ahead.
Which one is it? Red or white?
The yellow one. The yellow one sends you in.
Thank you.
Whoa, you just teleported right here?
I did.
This door is locked. This door is locked, so I think I saved you. This way is...
Hey, there's a key. There's a key.
And
Key,
another
key,
locked
key.
door. Oh, nice. Locked door. Right here. Nice. And you're really right in front of fire exit still.
I haven't seen any monsters. Uh-oh, giant.
I was watching you.
We cleaned the hell out of that place. You might want to ping, see if there's any more items. Oh my goodness.
It's not doing it for me.
Just a giant.
It's all good, man. Who did it?
I got a stun grenade for his ass.
Okay, you guys are good.
We got a bunch of shit.
He already inverted in. He inversed into a locked door.
I mean, if somebody's on teleporter, I mean, I'll inverse in.
You got 40 seconds if that's an option, and
Maybe
7
too
o'clock.
late.
7 o'clock at the moment.
I can't scan. It won't let me. It's not taking it.
Let me see.
I don't
Sometimes
know.
it does.
Man.
So you try. Yeah, you do it.
Oh yeah, it's yeah.
Yeah,
Should
how
you
do we
take
go?
off then? Because I mean, we don't know how much is in there.
I mean, it was a successful day.
Oh yeah, nonetheless. Should we risk it or just leave?
Let's just leave. I want that.
Yeah, okay.
We did well.
Yeah, we're just gonna have to do bigger days than that next week. They all have to be bigger than that.
How much do we have?
39.50.
39. Hell yeah.
What are you doing, Raid? Rozzy, there you
What
go.
the fuck? It actually works. What the fuck?
What works?
We're up here in space and it said there's 44 objects worth like over 6,000. I'm like, what? We're in space.
Oh.
Like it worked in space, but it wouldn't work on the planet. What the fuck?
That's about right.
Yeah. I don't live over here because it gets in the way of my button.
Yeah.
I want my buttons.
Spells, we selling big stuff or small stuff first?
Definitely more of the smaller shit.
Okay.
Just at least expensive, but I mean, you can sell all the paintings for sure, because I could get us some shit up there.
Alright. Keep cash register or not? Tell me 108.
Keep the cash register and the lights.
Just remember when you save and quit the game, unless you mod it, only saves like 45 items.
49. Yeah, I got
Well,
it.
it's
It's
45.
modded. Yeah, it's 49.
Okay, man.
Now it's 9.99. Most people don't know that, so.
Somebody told me it's 54.
No, it's 49.
Without modding it, it was supposed to be
45 does come out. I think 45 does come right, but I think it's 49.
No.
Your shovels and your flashlights,
Mhm.
all this, everything you buy counts toward it too. So.
No, somebody told me it's 54. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, because I have more items, and it says changes it from 99 or 49 to 99.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if that's 100% right, but
Oh, I don't
I'll
know
take
either.
it. I'll take it as it is. Oh yeah. I'm gonna put Let's see. So.
Damn, did they fix this guy? He actually works now.
Oh, I never heard that noise.
Okay, that's really weird. That's
Yeah.
really weird that happened as soon as I said that.
Yeah. You heard that too, where he starts stuttering?
Yeah.
I didn't hear it. I heard a girl scream.
It was, I don't know how to describe it. Timmy heard it.
1400. Son. I think there's shit right here. There's some shit. Oh, that's not this one. I'll look at that.
Yeah,
Let me
keep
see.
going.
Yeah.
Anything else? I've ever seen a pill bottle.
Oh,
You
that
feeling the
shit,
pill
really?
Your
bottle?
work is invaluable.
If you want to sit on it, yeah. These perfumes gotta go.
No.
It's just, it's like so non-expensive. Alright, 1400. That's like, get that 13.
They need to work on the company boss.
Yeah.
He's way too slow.
Alright.
You're what
Oh
keeps
no.
the company happy.
That's probably good. Just
I
wait
hate how
now.
sometimes you have to ring the bell like 12 times for answers.
I didn't mean to send my laser pointer, but I did. Let's go.
We pretty much sold everything, huh?
We
What's the?
oversold.
There's a
It was
pill
an accident.
bottle. There's
I didn't mean to.
lamps.
No, we're good. But I didn't mean to sell my
How much-
freaking laser pointer. So that was the shitty part.
We're sold by
That's why it was so
300.
much higher. Yeah, that's why it's so much higher too. I didn't want to sell that. But I
Yeah.
pressed that shit. Alright, anyone want
I
to
gotta-
get shit? Look, I think
Nah. We might need some shovels though.
that's what I'm about to buy, so sure.
Hey, quick question
have
though.
one.
I've heard some people say this, and I just wanted to ask and see if you knew. Some people say if you hold a mask up when you're haunted, it'll ward off the ghost girl. I've never heard that to be true.
I never heard that to be true
It's
yet.
not true.
Yeah, that's why I was
I think
like,
they're just fucking with. That's just. the
Don't
troll
do it,
part
it'll
they're
stick
trying
to your
make you put
face.
on.
no. I've heard some people say it wards
You
them
know the
off,
difference
and
between
I never
comedy and
believed
tragedy
it.
mask?
Is there a difference?
Yeah, there's a difference between the two.
Yeah, what's that?
You know? Now you know?
What is it?
You ever try to put them on? Comedy, you can act like you're putting it on. The tragedy, you straight put it on.
Oh.
You click it, and it put on. Comedy, you can mess around. Like, you're supposed to hold it to put it on. So you can click it and you act like you're putting it on, like
Okay.
Yeah, that's the difference.
No,
but
I didn't
you're
know
still,
there was a difference between the mask. I just never really fucked with them.
There's a shot.
Bing, bing,
Yeah,
bong,
no,
bing, bing, bing,
that
bing,
modding
bing,
kid I was talking about, he was saying if you hold up a mask, it wards off the ghost girl. And I'm like, yeah, I
Liars.
don't. I know. I'm like, that's not fucking true. I'm like, because I've
The
heard
ghost
like two
girl
people
bases
say,
her targeting on sanity, which has like
oh, I
6
know,
or
and
7
you can
different
use the
things.
shower. You can use the shower.
The shower
to, like,
doesn't
bring it
actually
back.
do anything.
Really, I've heard people say.
I
the
feel
shower
like
does
it
the
does,
same
like
thing.
sometimes, but
It
what
doesn't
really,
do
only thing
anything.
that there's two things that help you not die from the ghost girl. One is to be right here and looking outwards, basically, so she don't spawn in the ship,
Mm-hmm.
and she can't. Yeah, she'll spawn outside and can't get you. Other one is
Yeah.
to do this.
No, yeah, I've seen that.
That's it. That's the two ways.
Like I've had
You
180
can
hours
outrun her, but
experience with this, but
you can
yeah,
outrun her,
no.
but at the same time, most times she just instantly gets you anyway. Sometimes she just fucking
I
routines
just
like
want to
that.
ask some if some of these myths which had any validity to them because.
Oh, there's so many myths in this game. It's funny.
Oh, I know, it's ridiculous.
One myth is that
Could
there's
be a
a
mod.
room called the Bracken Room, and that he takes
be a
you there
mod.
when he kills you, but in reality, he actually just takes you to the opposite end of the map.
No, the Bracken
That's all he
room
does.
though does tell you that he's on the map every single time.
Well, there's
Yeah, he
almost
chills,
always a
and usually
Bracken
he
room.
chills by
It's
his
not
room.
about that room.
He takes
The
bodies
room-
usually around a room.
He
Sometimes
No,
doesn't
all
actually.
I'm saying is if you see that
He
room.
takes you to the opposite side
Mhm.
of the map. He doesn't actually
No,
take you to
yeah.
that room.
No,
Yeah,
I
I
know.
think so. But a lot of times it usually ends up around that room. That's all I'm just getting up
Like
at.
I've
But
had
I
him
know
No,
it's
take
all I'm
stuff.
saying
people.
is.
I've had him take people
Yeah,
to
go
the
ahead.
opposite side of the map and then hold on
No,
to
I've
them
seen
and
that.
take them right back to
Mhm.
the other side of the map again. So he's crossed the map twice carrying a body. I've seen
Gotcha.
that happen.
No, yeah, I've
Yeah,
seen
I
that.
see him. I see him
But
like
it's
hoard
nothing to
bodies
do with
right
the
outside
room.
his room though. So
No,
that's
whenever you see that
several occasions.
room at any point, that means he's
I
on the
know
map,
people
which
have
is
Yeah, that's a
usually.
spawn. Yeah.
People have
Mhm.
put things together. He actually spawns from vents like other monsters do.
No, I know. If you see that
Yeah.
room, that means he's gonna be there on the
He
map.
actually has nothing to
That's
do
it.
with the
Yeah, it just
room, but
means that
everybody
it's
calls
gonna
it a
be
Bracken
there.
room.
It's a spawn.
But that's just a myth.
All right, so we have 1300 and we need 2900.
No, I know he doesn't spawn there. It's just like if
1600.
you see that room, you know he's gonna spawn.
People also say that monsters get more aggressive when you pull the device out of the wall, but actually all that happens is it opens all the sealed doors
Oh, I
and
know.
it has a 70% chance to spawn 2 monsters instantly. That's all it does.
No, I know it's.
And it turns
I
the
don't know
lights
about
off.
two
but yeah.
monsters. I don't know
Yeah,
about two
it's
monsters because I've had a
70%
few
chance to spawn
spawn
two
on me.
monsters instantly.
I just grab it anyway, so I don't leave them
I've
behind.
had
Like for
like
example,
three or
you
so
can
spawn
grab
on
it
me.
and have a
See
bracken spawn
apparatus,
behind
unless
you.
it's the first thing I see, basically, I'm grabbing
No,
it.
I know. I've had that happen
It's
and
funny.
pulled it and had a thumper spawn behind me and immediately kill my run.
Yeah. Yeah. Go.
Oh shoot, the other person disconnected. Oh no, he's there.
Right here.
Yeah, I see, but dope. So that happens.
Why do I have the sneaking suspicion I'm just gonna go in here and die?
You don't have that. I'm
You
gonna
know
die
what's
first. This
bullshit?
could be at the very
One
last
time-
thing. After we get all the
one
loot,
time I
all this
entered
shit.
a room.
Yeah.
Hey, one time I
Bad
entered one of the
feeling
lower
about
tier
this.
moons and immediately got killed by a bracken.
Oh
As
yeah,
soon as
dude.
we landed, yeah, it was bullshit.
No way. Wow.
Like,
Heard.
I feel like it's just a very temporary
I'm
thing.
done.
So you have
I'm
to
going to bed. Good night, team. It was fun. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and thanks for watching. Bye.